Good morning. The hearing will come to order. The Oversight Committee exists to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the federal bureaucracy. This is our mission statement. Today, gasoline is $3.80. When this administration took office, it was close to half that. Whether it's 2009 at $2.05, 2010 at $2.72, or last year at $3.69, or today at $3.84, we know the gas prices are a leading indicator of whether or not we're on the right track or wrong track in the overall energy fight. The Department of Energy was produced as a separate cabinet-level position as a result of years of, in fact, declining fuel self-sufficiency and a need to ensure that we had a full cabinet at the President's table level department to ensure that energy was a priority. At that time, we were more energy self-sufficient than we are today. At that time, the dreams of green energy were talked about too. The fact is, at that time, we had a bigger percentage of our portfolio of electricity coming from nuclear than we do today. The fact is, 51% of electricity produced in America today is produced from that same dirty coal that it always used. Thanks to the Department of Energy and others, coal is cleaner than it was. The fact is, our reliance on coal, petroleum, natural gas, somewhat on hydroelectric, all remain somewhat similar to what it was. And the dreams and the investments in green energy continue to be somewhat elusive. That's not to say we shouldn't continue. As the Secretary may mention today, we still invest in fusion on a limited basis in the hopes that someday, from a glass of water, we'll produce green, sustainable energy at a high level, just as the sun does. The fact is, that's not what we're going to talk about today. I want to make it clear that administration after administration have set lofty goals and not achieved them. We are going to talk to a great extent today and hear from the Secretary about the Department of Energy's $14.5 billion loan guarantee program, including the much known and touted Solyndra. We're going to go beyond that, though. We're also going to review the Inspector General's report. We're going to recognize that, like any large agency, it's made up of multiple different sub-entities that must do their job, must be respectful of internal management, must heed the Inspector Generals and other groups who find fault. Today, we are not here to find primary fault. We're here to, in fact, ask the Secretary to respond to a number of findings, many of which came from whistleblowers, but even more came from internal audits done by the Inspector General and the Department of Energy itself. Let's make it clear. We are the Oversight Committee, but we are also the committee that has an obligation to ensure that reform occurs. Post the election of the President, the first act of the new Congress was, for all practical purposes, to pass the largest single expenditure of money in a relatively at the discretion of the President way that in history. In other words, the stimulus was very much discretionary money. At the time, people said, no, it's going to be well accounted for. I think we know better today. We know that, in fact, a tremendous amount of money, enough money to double the size of the budget of the Secretary we have before us today, was put at his disposal. It is hard to spend that much money and spend it responsibly. I believe in our Q&A today, we're going to find that, in fact, in many cases, it was too much money too quickly to be spent well. As we look at weatherization failures noted by the Inspector General, it's going to be clear too much money, too loose control, too much to ramp up and do well perhaps will be the excuse. But the bottom line is we need to learn from this mistake that if our goal is, in fact, to save energy through providing assistance for weatherization for needy families, that in fact we have to make sure that it's done well, it's done cost effectively, and that there be no excuse that we simply couldn't find enough good vendors. So as a result, we found vendors who did a shoddy job and in many cases left people worse off, not better off, than they were before their windows or insulation were installed. It is very clear that the Obama DOE was DOA when it came to delivering affordable energy to consumers. One of the challenges we have today will be to ask, did we need to have large loans? Why did we need them? Were they proof of concepts, or were they part of a grand plan by the administration to ensure that enough funding to scale up green energy to make it work was possible? As a Californian, I'm very well aware that many of the projects would not even have penciled out for these loan programs if my state had not mandated that our incumbent electric utilities buy energy at as much as 10 times the cost of other energy sources. California and other states have made determinations to buy green energy at whatever the cost was. That fueled a lot of penciling of projects that could have worked, but as we found, they didn't always work. Additionally, the Department of Energy's $5 billion weatherization assistance program is a stunning example of wasted billions of taxpayer dollars. Let's understand, $5 billion should have done more for needy people in America. Perhaps the most important thing is it should have been spent at the pace that would have allowed every weatherization project to be done by a skilled contractor at an affordable price, delivered and verified. That does not mean that the Secretary before us is directly responsible. He oversees a vast, it's not on the script, a vast agency that has multiple bureaucratic and appointed individuals. But we need to ask today to Secretary Chu, can we allow this to happen again? Can we do better? What were the lessons learned? How would you keep it from happening again? And since weatherization programs are not exclusive to just the stimulus, can we in fact do a much better job? Have we found out, if done correctly, what the real benefits would be? Last but not least, I'd like to commend the Secretary today for being probably the smartest Cabinet officer in a generation, for being someone who understands the potential of technology. Our criticisms today of the Department of Energy, I believe you'll find, have more to do with whether or not the people that work for you delivered the kind of product they should have delivered, whether in fact people that you are asked to hold accountable, in fact, did you a disservice by putting either their personal priorities or simply not being good managers. So as we go through today, Mr. Secretary, I, for one, am somebody who believes that your continued participation in the science community, your continued participation in the future of energy and of science are essential. So as the questions get hard, please understand they're not about you. They're about an agency that you began to lead nearly 3 years ago. And with that, I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing. And to you, Mr. Secretary, I am very glad that you are with us today. And I want to thank you on behalf of a grateful Congress and a grateful country for what you do for us every day. One of our nation's most important public policy goals is to move towards energy independence and energy efficiency. We all know the reasons for this. We want to enhance national security by reducing our dependence on foreign oil. We want to remain competitive with countries like China by developing innovative technologies of the future. We want to boost our economy while reducing our environmental footprint. And we want to lower energy costs for American consumers. We all agree with these goals. So how are we doing? First, the United States is now producing more oil than any time in the last 8 years. We are producing record amounts of natural gas. We are now the largest producer of natural gas in the world. The administration has approved more than 400 permits for additional drilling, but with safeguards to prevent the devastation faced by the Gulf after the oil spill of 2010. We have also become more efficient. In 2010, oil imports to the United States fell below 50% for the first time in 13 years. And a new agreement on fuel economy standards by the administration and U.S. auto companies will reduce oil consumption by more than 2 million barrels a day by 2025. Regardless of how much we drill and how much we save, however, we know that these measures alone will not achieve energy independence. We use about 20% of the world's oil, but have only about 2 to 3% of known reserves. We need an aggressive policy to invest in the most innovative clean technologies of the future. And that's where the Recovery Act comes in. The Recovery Act has been extremely successful in responding to the economic crisis of 2008. It allocated more than $35 billion for more than 15,000 projects and increased the number of people employed by between 1 million and 2.9 million, according to the Congressional Budget Office. The Recovery Act has also made significant investments in projects that boost the ability of private sector companies to innovate and produce new technologies in order to generate more energy and lower costs for consumers. These investments include electric grid improvements, advanced energy manufacturing, geothermal businesses, and hundreds of other projects. The United States is now on track to double renewable energy generation by the end of this year. And companies supported by the Recovery Act are making amazing breakthroughs in technologies that could dramatically reduce energy costs and generate whole new industries. For all of these reasons, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle have written nearly 500 letters in support of these broad goals and specific projects. In addition to evaluating the overall effectiveness of the Recovery Act, one of our jobs in this committee is to examine the procedures used by the Department of Industry to determine whether they can be improved. Although the bankruptcy of Solyndra raised legitimate questions about these procedures, it did not and does not support unsubstantiated allegations that the Department engaged in criminal conduct or made its funding decisions based on political favoritism, pay-to-play relationships, or outright corruption. We have to be responsible about our oversight. We cannot simply attack any program that has the words Obama and clean air attached to them. We have to base our review on the facts and strive to serve the long-term interests of the American people rather than the short-term interests of partisan politics. For example, last week, the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office issued a report with recommendations to improve the procedures used by the Department to evaluate loan guarantee applications. GAO also made this little noticed finding. It concluded that the Department's due diligence procedures, and I quote, may equal or exceed those used by private lenders to assess and mitigate project risks, end of quote. I think the Department should be commended for these actions, even as it continues to become more efficient and effective. As our committee conducts its oversight of the Recovery Act, I hope we fairly assess the overall success of the Department's programs and focus on constructive ways to fulfill our shared goal of energy independence and energy efficiency. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent for 1 minute to make a statement.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized.
I appreciate that, and I will be brief. Let me just say this. The Department of Energy's budget authority went from $23 billion in 2008 to $69 billion in 2009 when the Secretary took over. DOE was the main conduit through which the Obama administration sought to implement their green energy strategy. And 3 years later, what do the American people have to show for DOE's use of their money? A disgraceful portfolio of loans and loan guarantees. Solyndra, which went bankrupt in August 2011, had a credit rating of BB- when the Department of Energy gave it its loan guarantee. And we are all shocked to find out that the entire DOE portfolio for the 1705 program has an average unweighted credit rating the same as Solyndra's, double B minus, with several companies receiving credit ratings even below that of the bankrupt Solyndra. I mean, when you look at this information, I think there are only two explanations. Either gross incompetence at this agency, or, just as dangerous, decisions were not made on the merits of the projects, but rather on the names in the company's Rolodexes. For a disturbingly large portion of the projects that got loan guarantees, there are connections to the Obama administration too stark to ignore. In my opinion, this loan guarantee program typifies the kind of cronyism that has made Americans across the country despise what they see in Washington. Mr. Chairman, it's either incompetence at this agency or you had to be a friend of the administration's to get a loan guarantee. And that needs to be investigated. I want to thank you for having this critical and important hearing today. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Members will have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record. And before I recognize the panel, I'd ask unanimous consent that the list of all the Republican members of this committee who submitted loan guarantees be placed in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I might note that no Republican-only request for funding from the Department of Energy were granted. The only one that was granted was actually bipartisan, had almost all the Indiana members, including the senator. Additionally, Mr. Cummings had sent me a letter yesterday. Here's a full response letter along with all of the committee notes that substantiate the invalidity of your letter. With that, I would recognize our first panel, first and only panel, the Honorable Stephen Chu. Mr. Secretary, as I did in my opening, I made it clear you're undoubtedly the smartest person to occupy your office in a very long time, if ever. Your resume, including maybe not more patents than I have, but patents that are certainly more long-reaching than mine, speak for themselves. I would, however, note that the committee rules require we swear all witnesses, and would you please rise to take the oath. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect a yes. Mr. Secretary, in my printed response, it says, as it always does, limit yourself to 5 minutes, look at the clock, and so on. To be fair, take the time you need. Bear in mind that your entire opening statement will be placed in the record. So what is not in the record is just as valuable as what is in the approved notes. With that, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Issa. Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Energy's work through the Recovery Act to strengthen the U.S. economy and promote a secure energy future. When President Obama took office, the United States was in the midst of the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression. To meet this challenge, we had to respond quickly and forcefully. In February 2009, President Obama signed into law the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to jumpstart the economy and lay the foundation for our future prosperity. Today, we are moving in the right direction, and the economy has added private sector jobs for 24 straight months. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimated that at its peak, the Recovery Act was responsible for up to 3.6 million jobs nationwide. The Energy Department received more than $35 billion through the Recovery Act, supporting more than 15,000 projects across the country and helping the United States to compete in the global clean energy race. Since the summer of 2010, we have consistently supported between 40,000 and 50,000 direct jobs each quarter. The Department takes its obligation to the American taxpayer seriously, and from day one, our mission was to get the Recovery Act funding out the door quickly, responsibly, and transparently. Oversight has been a top priority for the Department and me. We put in place an aggressive monitoring system to ensure that the Department and its grantees spend Recovery Act funds wisely. The Department takes any case of waste, fraud, or abuse very seriously. To date, less than 0.1% of the Department's Recovery Act projects have resulted in a criminal indictment or conviction for waste, fraud, or abuse. Each of these cases was unacceptable. We have taken action to address issues early on and hold responsible parties accountable. Moreover, the Department has cooperated and will continue to cooperate with the Inspector General's investigations. I have spent my career as a scientist. Rigorous peer review and double-checking someone else's findings are fundamental to sound scientific progress, and I believe the same is true in the government. So I welcome any and every sincere effort at oversight, and where we find mistakes, we have and we will move swiftly to correct them. I hope today can be an opportunity to have a serious, substantive dialogue. The American people expect all of us to honestly assess the investments we have made and chart a course for the future. Ultimately, we share the same goal, ensuring that America wins the clean energy race. While any case of fraud, waste, or abuse is unacceptable and deserves swift and appropriate action, oversight also requires us to examine the overall effectiveness of our Recovery Act programs. These investments are helping to modernize the ways we produce and use energy so we can compete for energy jobs of the 21st century. We have made strong progress in several areas. Through the Recovery Act, we have helped families and communities save money by saving energy. We have put construction workers, contractors, and others to work, weatherizing 680,000 homes. Thanks to the Recovery Act investments, the United States has nearly doubled renewable energy generation since 2008. Projects supported by the 1603 program, the 48C tax credit, and the Section 1705 loan program are putting tens of millions of Americans to work building and installing the clean energy technologies that will power our future. The Recovery Act is also helping to diversify our transportation sector to protect consumers from high gas prices and to reduce our dependence on imported oil. We are supporting advanced biofuel facilities and strengthening our electric vehicle manufacturing industry. Through the Recovery Act, we are upgrading the grid to a more secure, stable electrical system. We are investing in cutting-edge research so the United States can maintain our leadership in science and technology. The Department of Energy's Recovery Act efforts are working. They have created jobs and put us in a stronger position to compete in the global clean energy economy. Last year, the United States reclaimed the title from China as the world's leader in total clean energy investments. However, our comeback is due in large part to the programs and tax incentives that have expired or are set to expire soon. America has reached a crossroads. We can play to win in the clean energy race, investing in America's workers, industries, and innovations, or we can wave the white flag and cede leadership to other countries. I believe the United States can and must win this race. The Recovery Act gave us a strong foundation to build on, but we must move forward with fierce urgency. Thank you, and now I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Let me start by saying you were still speaking in the present tense. My understanding is the Recovery Act is expired. You can't spend funds under the Recovery Act now. Is that correct?
The Recovery Act is expired. There are programs put in place. For example, in the loan program, we still have the majority of disbursements to go forward with. So there is a recovering due diligence that has to be done in the Recovery Act.
So from a pure standpoint of the Stimulus/Recovery Act, it was all supposed to be spent in a year or two in order to get the economy going again. We're 3 years past its passage and you haven't spent it all. Would you say that, in fact, much of the money that you have left to spend legitimately is, in fact, not stimulus per se, but, in fact, simply a plussing up of what you got to do for your entire 4 years as Secretary?
No, I would I respectfully disagree. The requirement was we would have to work towards obligating the funds.
No, I understand the law. Okay. What I want to hit you on is a little bit more of your undergraduate economics. Stimulus was supposed to get the people working again. It was not anticipated, nor was it designed to go 4 years. But in fact, you're saying today that it's going to go 4+ years. You will still be spending or obligating these funds, particularly from the loan programs, after a full 4 years at the current run rate, meaning that the money rushed in quickly and spent, basically $800 billion, was in fact an effective doubling of your budget for the entire 4 years.
Not exactly, not really, in fact, because if you look at the things that were funded under the Recovery Act, they were proportioned considerably differently than what the earlier Department of Energy budgets had been doing.
Well, I didn't head this committee when President Bush was doing the plus-ups for the war, but I watched Department of Defense simply decide how much to put in one pot and how much to put in the other pot, and basically what happened is DOD got a huge windfall going into the war that let them catch up with a lot of things they wanted to do. The point I think that we're making here today is your weatherization program. Would you put the weatherization slide up? This is from your own IG. You rushed quickly, and you effectively, and these are hard to see, but these are actual finished products where the vendor left and the IG went in. And the IG's report says basically you didn't have the controls in order to ensure that vendors like this were quickly fired and the job was corrected. So on one hand, weatherization was effectively doing a shoddy job. This is an actual, I don't think most of us would like to have that particular improved blanket over our hot water heater, although I've been told it might be somewhat effective. Realistically, on one hand, you had a lot of money coming in quickly, and on the other hand, you had projects like Solyndra and so on, and many others that are still going to be ongoing and funded well into the future. Is that correct?
We have some projects that are ongoing funding, as you noted, in the future, but as I noted, virtually all the money has been obligated. Okay,
well, obligated is not stimulative. Now, let me just ask one basic question. In an earlier hearing, you gave yourself an A-. In weatherization, do you give yourself an A-?
Actually, I do.
Okay. In controlling the cost of gasoline at the pump, do you give yourself an A-?
Well, the tools we have at our disposal are limited, but I would say I would give myself a little higher in that since I became a Secretary of Energy, I've been doing everything I can to get long-term solutions.
Well, and I appreciate that. Now, the President took two pieces of credit in the State of the Union that I want to just question you on factually. First of all, he said that the Department of Energy created fracking. He took credit for that in the State of the Union. My understanding is fracking was created 60 years ago, and enhancements of fracking, which the Department of Energy participated in funding the improvements, occurred before you came to office. Is that correct?
It is absolutely true that there were earlier ventures into fracking. It was producing, at the very earliest times, less than 1% of the natural gas. The Department of Energy, in 78 to 92, I believe, invested in fracking. We got out when Schlumberger got in. Okay.
So when the President says the Department of Energy is the reason, that's great. The only problem is he was still in high school when the Department of Energy started investing in that. I just want to make sure we understand the timeline of this particular President's claims. Last but not least, if you had to do it all again, would you have made the large-scale investments that you made in Solyndra and all these others, or would you, in fact, have made smaller scales? In other words, was it essential to put tens of billions of dollars at risk, hundreds of billions of dollars at risk in some ways? Was that scale responsible, or, in fact, proof of concept, some sort of a scaling up where we could have had a Solyndra bankruptcy for less?
That's an excellent question. So as Herb Allison in his committee report commented, our loan portfolio can be divided into essentially three tranches. One was the tranche of investing in the deployment of innovative technologies, solar, wind, others, geothermal. Virtually all of them had power purchase agreements. That actually requires a considerable amount of money, but as Herb Allison said, on balance, those are lower risk. The higher risk ones included innovative manufacturing because you don't really know how things are going to. But on that innovative manufacturing, we think that some loan assistance played a very useful purpose. And then finally, there were two major auto loans to Ford and Nissan, which at the time were regarded as risky, especially the Ford loan, and did not have at the time a reasonable rating. But that turned out to be a very successful loan, and we saved a lot of jobs, created a lot of jobs, and Ford has bounced back tremendously.
Great. I'm sure we'll get to other questions about the term innovation. With that, I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, yesterday, Chairman made a new allegation. He said that in reviewing a loan guarantee for an Arizona-based company called First Solar, the Department of Energy, and I quote, manipulated analysis, ignored objections from career professionals, and strategically modify loan evaluations in order to force project funding out of the door, end of quote. Mr. Secretary, prior to issuing its report, did the committee contact you about that allegation or ask you for an explanation?
Yes, it did.
And did you provide them with one?
I believe we did.
And can you tell us now, are these allegations true?
No. What was happening was that there was a series of emails and internal debate among our career professionals as to whether we had internal policies established that we wanted these loans to support innovative deployment of innovative technology. And there is a robust discussion between our career professionals as to whether it met the self-imposed criteria. And in the end, the person who was looking and trying to decide within his own group said, no, these we think are innovative and crosses that threshold.
Did the Department manipulate the analysis, ignore senior officials, and force this funding out the door for political reasons?
No. In fact, this was a discussion all with the career employees who, by the way, I would have to say I know some of these individuals. They're truly outstanding individuals.
Was your career employee overruled by political appointees in order to defy his own scientific judgment? Is any of that true?
No, it's quite the opposite. Again, it was all in the career staff in an internal discussion.
Mr. Secretary, I don't know if you are aware, but in March 2011, Arizona Governor Jan Brewer issued a statement praising First Solar's projects in the state, and she said, and I quote, "First Solar's presence here in Arizona has been a great engine in driving our renewable energy sector forward," end of quote. She also noted that First Solar's Mesa facility project would create 600 quality jobs, and this is her words, and the potential for hundreds more, and would help in promoting Arizona's Commerce Authority's plan for business attraction, retention, and expansion, end of quote. In October 2011, Governor Brewer touted First Solar's DOE projects as part of Arizona's ascension, quote, ascension as a national and global leader in the solar energy. Were you aware of those statements?
Perhaps distantly, but
and can you tell us, did you take any action because of her political support of First Solar?
No. As I've said repeatedly, we evaluate each loan application on its technical merits.
Now, Governor Brewer was not alone. Senator John McCain also praised First Solar's decision to build in Arizona, and he stated First Solar's, quote, First Solar's announcement to build a new factory in Mesa and deploy their domestically manufactured modules in solar projects like Agua Caliente in Yuma County will not only create jobs for Arizonans, but also represents another important step towards greater energy security. And so, were you aware of that?
Again, I don't read all of those statements, so I'm not really sure.
Mr. Secretary, one last question. On September 20th, 2011, Chairman went on national television and condemned the Department's entire loan guarantee program as a, quote, broad scandal that, quote, end of quote, broad scandal that, quote, has been driven by political favoritism, accusations of pay-to-play relationships, end of quote. He stated that having politicians involved in selecting winners and losers is how we, quote, end up with corruption in government, end of quote. Is there any truth at all to the allegation that you base your findings and decisions on political favoritism or on pay-to-play relationships or on outright corruption?
No, there is none. Now,
you said in answering one of the Chairman's questions, you said he asked you about your grading yourself with regard to weatherization. I think you gave yourself an A or an A minus. And gas at the pump, you gave yourself an A. Mr. Chairman, you took a little longer than I did. Just going to have a little extra time. All right. Let me ask you this. Explain why that is. I'm just curious.
Sure. Very, very quickly, because I see time is running out. If you looked at, for example, the weatherization program, we set up a system where before you reimbursed for work done, everything had to be inspected. See, our money went to the state, the state went to local organizations, and local organizations then arranged for contractors. In addition to that you had to verify the work had been done. We also set up, through the states, insisted on an independent audit. At least 5% of the work had to be seen and its value done independently. And what we found in this audit was there were about 3 or 4% of the work fell into 3 categories. One category is perhaps the family didn't qualify because there was a maximum of 200% above poverty line. In some cases, if the work was not done adequately or shoddily done. And finally, if not all the stones were unturned, there could have been other weatherization work in that program. I don't have the breakdown, but it's lumped into those 3. So what they found was roughly 3 or 4% went into those 3 categories in an independent audit. Then IG, the DOE IG and the Government Accounting Office did another independent check on what this independent group found, and my understanding is they found very little beyond what our IG found. So in 3 or 4% of the cases, and in all cases where there were things as shown in those pictures where, yes, it was a very badly done job, the contractors were asked, go back, fix it on your own dime. And so if you look at that 3 or 4%, this is not that bad in an area where a lot of insulation and things like that are largely invisible. And so it was the mere fact of we set up this robust oversight. And then the third independent oversight wasn't really finding anything more. It told us that it was more or less all right. I mean, but again, let me stress, and I'll say this, we are not happy with those 3 or 4, those instances where there was shoddy workmanship, and we are not happy with any of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're very welcome. I'd ask unanimous consent now that the email records, and I apologize, Mr. Secretary, your people provided no bait stamps and delivered only on paper. So I'll read a little bit. The document dated Tuesday, February 1st, 2011 at 1:57 p.m. from David Franz, which, by the way, is the one that says, isn't that a carbon copy of Agua Caliente? His answer is, it is. Something prohibited within the regulations. It's in your report, too. Secondly, the document dated February 1st, 2011, 12:12 p.m. from Sarah Heisinger. And third, the document dated Thursday, June 23rd, 2011, 12:34 p.m. From Kim Dong, who I understand is, or Dong, I'm sorry, Doug Kim. I'm reading, unfortunately, his from rather than his name. Doug Kim, who is Director, Technical and Project Management Division, LP 30, Loan Program Office. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, may I have copies of this?
Of course, you already have copies.
Where are they?
They were all delivered to you in the same fashion with no bait stamps by the Department of Energy, who chose to print off of computers paper so they would be extremely hard to go through. We were delivered 50 boxes. How about you were delivered the same boxes? With that, we recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Chu, thank you for being here. My constituents commute on average 25 minutes a day to work. 84% of them drive themselves. Public transportation is not readily available in western North Carolina. Tell me what you've done to reduce the price of gas at the pumps. What policies have you put in place to reduce the price of gas at the pumps?
Well, I can tell you what the administration has done, and then I'll narrow it down to what the Department of Energy can do and has done. Certainly, a lot of federal lands have been put up for auction for production of oil. Although due to a complex set of reasons, it is certainly true that since the President took office, the amount of oil production in the United States has gone up.
But my question, Secretary Chu, as you know, the production of oil on public lands has actually gone down under your administration's watch. What policies and production has gone up on non-public lands? I mean, for instance, in the Dakotas, I mean, the Bakken Shale is fantastic, wonderful technology advancements. But what policies has this administration put into effect to help reduce the price of the pumps?
Well, there was one policy. It was, I would say, a reaction to an oil interruption due to the Libyan incident. But in the tools that the Department of Energy has at its disposal, what we have done is we have worked with manufacturers to improve the the efficiency of internal combustion engines to reduce those costs. We are very aggressive in trying to look for alternatives other than petroleum, if adopted worldwide, could have a moderating effect on the price of gasoline, bring those prices down. For example, we were very enthusiastic about the development of natural gas, shale gas, especially over the last 5 and 10 years. And the Department of Energy has been very active looking at ways to use natural gas for long-haul trucking, for centralized delivery trucking. We've just put out an announcement saying we want to see if we can reduce the cost of storage of natural gas in automobiles and short-haul trucks. That could be readily available. If we can do this, we can move to what are called biofuel cars, so that the same internal combustion engine can burn natural gas or gasoline or diesel. But one of the barriers is the very high cost of that carbon fiber tank or the very high pressure. So we have pushed forward a program to develop better storage. So everywhere, those are examples. Battery, electrification, alternatives. Right now the electric cars are fairly expensive, $32,000 for a Nissan Leaf before subsidies. The Chevy Volt's about $40,000. Very aggressive about adding battery development so that we can dramatically bring down the cost of electrification to $20,000, $22,000.
Well, Secretary Chu, you've mentioned a number of things. At what point will those have an effect of my constituents' cost of purchasing gas at the pumps? Well,
as you know, and as we all know, that you look at all the tools available in our chest, and we look at all those tools. But as the President has repeatedly said, there's no single bullet. Yes, we want to increase production. Yes, we want to do all those other things. And mostly we want to diversify, to give our consumers a choice to decrease the
So at what point will those have an impact on the market?
Natural gas long-haul trucking, very quickly. A consortium of companies.
I mean, before the next election, perhaps?
Yes. Their plan is to have invested $300 million in liquid nitrogen fueling stations by December 2012.
My time is short. You've listed a long list of things that this administration has done. I have not yet heard that they're trying to increase the supply of American oil or our refining capacity or limit the regulations and the diversity of blends that are required. I have heard nothing from you today that indicates a policy this administration has put in place that will meaningfully impact the price at the pumps, other than driving it up. The policies this administration has put in place have actually increased the cost of fuel at the pumps. They've increased the cost of commuting for my constituents. And to tell my constituents with 10% unemployment in Western North Carolina that you need to go buy a Nissan Leaf, that you need to, in order to commute for 50 minutes a day, you're going to have an employer who's wonderful enough to provide you a place to plug in your car so you can get home, is absolutely ridiculous. And the anger that my constituents have of the cost at the pumps is very real. And if the President doesn't get this, if the Secretary of Energy doesn't get this, we've got a real problem here. We doubled the budget of the Department of Energy in 2009, and yet we're paying twice as much at the pumps. This is absolutely ridiculous. We've seen cylindrical.
The gentleman's time has expired.
But we've not seen a reduction at the pumps.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Secretary, I know there wasn't a question there, but would you like to restate what I believe was a quote that they're investing these billions in liquid nitrogen?
Sorry, I misstated. Liquefied natural gas. Thank you.
Correct. Without objection, we'll also place the article from the cleancitiesenergy.gov site on liquid natural gas. With that, we recognize the gentlelady from, you walked in as a photo finish. Which one's first? From the District of Columbia. Okay. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for being here. We live in a bubble. It's called the United States of America. But when I think of oil, of course, I think of the increasing consumption by the rest of the world. I was astonished to learn that we have only about 2% of the world's known oil supplies, and yet consume 20% of the oil supply. And noted this in a report by the managing director, senior analyst covering oil and gas for Oppenheimer and Company, who said if we drill in the middle of Manhattan and everybody drilled in their backyard, we would not have enough oil to move the global market. Would you explain what he's talking about?
Well, the oil markets are an international market because one can ship oil fairly inexpensively anywhere in the world. And yes, it's true that America has increased its oil production in the last 4 years. That's a good thing because it means we import less oil, and we're all for that. But there are other countries, for example, Canada has became a major oil exporting country, and yet, aside from the difference in taxes, the average Canadian and U.S. prices bob up and down exactly the same. Of course, there are differences in province and states because of taxes, but so the issue here is it's an overall supply and overall demand, and there are what I would call concerns with the Middle East that also tend to drive up prices. The overall demand is dominated by developing countries, notably China and India. The demand in the United States is quite moderate. In fact, it's essentially flat, which is good news, especially as we increase our oil production. That's why our imports have gone down from 60% to, let's say, 45, 46%. And it will continue to go down because we're going to increase oil production in the U.S. because of new technologies. So the direct tie is really this world oil price, in large part driven by growing demand in developing countries. In large part, there is an issue having to do with excess reserve capacity that also makes people concerned. And then finally, worries of the Middle East.
Yeah, and so what countries do in their own territories doesn't much affect the world market and the world demand for oil, which brings me to going to other forms of energy. Do we have the same competition for other forms of energy that we have for oil and gas, the way they're coming at us in China and India for the oil? Are they coming at us? Do we have any head start at all for alternative forms of energy?
Yes. This is absolutely. Natural gas is one. The infrastructure for liquefying and shipping natural gas around the world, it's starting, but it doesn't really exist. So there are big differences in natural gas prices. And that's why the Department of Energy is so keen on offloading some of our transportation energy to natural gas. Biofuels is another possibility because we have great agricultural resources just as we have great natural gas resources. So beginning to create biofuels without subsidy is our goal. That can offset petroleum is another big deal for us. And so those two things create wealth in the United States.
So instead of everybody joining the race to apparently nowhere for oil, understanding that we've got to get as much of that as we can, we've got to join other races as well. Does the recovery, the funding of some of the alternative sources in the Recovery Act help in this race toward at least some form of energy which would be usable and affordable? And if so, how did the Recovery Act help in that
Well,
respect?
the RPE was started in the Recovery Act. RPE has been instrumental in many of the innovative biofuels things, in batteries, electrification. Also, an RPE company has actually doubled the world record for lithium-ion energy density, and we think that the cost of manufacturing will remain the same or perhaps even go down. So you've just cut in half the price of electric battery. If we can cut it to one-third, one-quarter, we can really talk about a $20,000 car that can pay for itself in 5 years, be cheaper than the $16,000 car, and that will bring immediate relief to all the families who are trapped in situations where they have long commutes. And we do feel that pain, and we are working as hard as we can to give the American public those technologies. The good news is those technologies could also
I hit the private rather than the talk. I apologize. The article be placed in the record. The U.S. is sitting on a 200-year oil supply. This is from the Business Insider. It quotes President Obama. President Obama said the U.S. possesses 3% of the world's oil reserves, or about 22.3 billion barrels, which comes out to 200 years supply of our need. And with that, we recognize, without objection to order, without that, we recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Desjardins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Secretary Chu. Appreciate your testimony today. And 5 minutes goes very quickly. If you could, no one likes yes or no answers, but if you could answer yes or no to these questions, I think they're fairly straightforward. With regard to First Solar, DOE deemed both Agua Caliente and Antelope Valley Solar Ranch as innovative projects, correct?
That's correct.
The innovative component of the Agua Caliente projects involved inverters that benefited from fault ride-through technology and dynamic voltage regulation, correct? Yes, that's correct. Thank you. And you agree that Antelope Valley Solar Ranch's application indicated it would use the same exact inverter-related technology?
A very similar technology, plus one additional innovative technology, tracking of inexpensive, one-axis tracking of the sun with these lower efficiency solar panels.
Okay. And but since Agua Caliente's already relied on the inverter technology,
would the gentleman yield for a second? As a Californian, I have to say Agua Caliente.
Yes, I did not want to correct.
The chairman of the Agua Caliente tribe in my district just passed away, so I'm acutely aware that today I'd like it. We'll give you back the time. Agua Caliente.
How did you pronounce Desjardins the first time?
So I was showing off. For a long time I just said, "You're next, Doc."
Thank you. Okay. Caliente, is that right? Okay.
Agua Caliente, yes.
Okay. But since Agua Caliente already relied on the inverter technology, Antelope Valley needed to find another innovation to further differentiate itself. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it had this other differentiated technology.
Okay. Are you aware that DOE deemed single-axis trackers which rotate to follow the sun as the innovation that would differentiate Antelope Valley from Agua Caliente?
I believe so.
Okay. I think that's what you were referring to earlier. Okay. Can we put up a slide where Dong Kim discusses the trackers? Oh, it is already up. Thank you. Secretary Chu, I'm about to show you an email here where Dong Kim, the Director of DOE's Technical and Project Management Division, makes clear that these trackers are not innovative. Can you explain this?
Trackers have been used before. They've been used in smaller scale things. They've been used in higher efficiency solar panels because the added cost of tracking the motor, the locking as the sun goes across, was something that had been used before. But when you go to very large scale, and the thin film technology, the CAD telluride they were using at the time, 11% efficient, wasn't comparing to where you had a much higher efficiency, let's say 16% silicon to track. And so the question was, can you get a large project and the additional capital expense of tracking to make it work with at that time relatively low efficiency panels, which were lower cost to make. Now, the good news is the efficiency is going up to 14.5%, but that was the merging of the technologies. And in the end, Don Kim decided that perhaps, and again, it was a total discussion within that group as to what would rise to the threshold of innovation.
Okay. So you disagree with Don Kim?
I think Don Kim has an opinion that he then wrote the justification of that opinion later on. And so what you see is the workings of an internal discussion with Dong, with others within that section of the department. So this is all internal within the career folk. And so Don Kim actually, when he wrote up, because in the end it's going to be a decision that they put forward. If they decided it was not going to be innovative, then it would not go forward. The other email that was referred to, we believe, was referring to the terms of the project finance. It's more a finance agreement rather than technology. But I don't really know that we're just assuming that's the carbon copy. But I can't put myself in the minds of Dave France, but we think it might have to do with the terms of the finance agreement with regard to the reference of carbon copy.
Okay, thank you. So based on the facts, Antelope Valley Solar Ranch failed to meet the innovativeness required, and as a result, DOE made a $646 million mistake by approving the loan. Will you personally commit to preventing any additional money from going to First Solar's Antelope Valley project?
Well, first, I don't really know what the status of that is. Once we make a commitment to a loan and begin to disperse the loans, we take very seriously the contractual obligations. And so we can get back to you on what those contractual obligations are.
Okay. And the projects need to meet benchmarks, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. My time is
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
So, but since they're both with the same company, and they used a carbon copy and created a false difference, one that really didn't exist, one that could have been some units with and some without, by definition, isn't their application, in fact, one that you could go back and question whether their application claiming innovation was correct or not? You're the owner of 15 patents, well, including the ones that are pending. The fact is that a patent is not a right that you can't be reviewed for its accuracy later. Don't you have the right to go back and look at the accuracy of claims by a company who chose to invent, if you will, a difference where there was none? Well, from an innovation standpoint.
I think in terms of a loan guarantee and a finance agreement, once you've decided, you've made a commitment, and you go forward, as you well know, that's a contractual basis. It was an internal debate within our career folk as to whether the next project, Antelope Valley, bore the threshold of innovation, and those people who, as I said before, are very, very good people, determined that it was so. So again, once we entered into an agreement, we have to be very careful. There are milestones, there are things of that nature, and we'll follow those procedures.
Okay, I will give the minority a copy of this, but I'm going to enter at this time into the record page 12, which indicates no difference in the application on the actual document. We'll give you a copy of it, Mr. Secretary, and come back to it in a few minutes. And with that, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, is here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And welcome, Secretary Chu. Over here. It's great to see you again, and thank you for your leadership. I think our country is very fortunate to have somebody with your caliber and your background leading the Department of Energy, and I thank you for your leadership. For some, Dr. Chu, the narrative here seems to be that the stimulus bill, with respect to energy in particular, was a complete waste of time, a boondoggle, not very transparent, and accomplished almost nothing. In fact, maybe negative nothing, because there was fraud, there was waste, we didn't know what we were doing. I'm just curious, let's take weatherization, which has been singled out. At the time we were considering the stimulus bill, weatherization was heralded as a potential boon in terms of energy efficiency in helping lower-income folks who otherwise couldn't retrofit their homes or businesses. It would put people to work, and it would save on energy costs over time. We have a report today by the majority staff that basically asserts that billions were wasted in that program. It didn't work. Your take?
We think that aside from these isolated, some subset of that 3 or 4%, it was overall a very successful program. Its overall impact is actually can't be fully felt. But let me just tell you a little story. I went to one of the earlier homes that was weatherized. A widow in Milwaukee. She was living in a small house. It was weatherized. They put insulation in the ceiling, in the walls. They gave a new heating system. And she said for the first time in as long as she could remember, she can now eat breakfast in her kitchen. Before that time, it was just too cold, and most of her, and this is within 200% of poverty level, this is a person who is suffering and spending a lot of a very limited set income on her energy bill, and that went way down. And so then that person can take that money and channel it right back into the local economy. And so we have hundreds and thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of stories like that if you consider the 680,000 homes that were weatherized. 680,000.
And do I understand that the average saving per year for each of those 680,000 is about $437?
That's been an estimate, yes.
So would you say that the program funded by the Recovery Act was a success in your view?
Yes, as I said, that's why I was willing to give that one an A. I'm actually always amused when people ask me as a professor how I grade myself. I'm a tough grader, but in any case, yes, that would, and again, let me point out in those instances where there has been a shoddy workmanship, for example, we went back and insisted they fix it with no cost to the taxpayer.
Yes. Well, perhaps some who have an ideological bent against any such intervention may want to highlight some of the problems and gloss over the preponderance of success. But in terms of effectiveness in energy efficiency, this program has long been touted as something that actually is quite effective. Is that correct?
Well, it is very effective, and it brings relief. And when you see it on a very personal level, when you actually see how it affects our population. And
Mr. Secretary, let me just, if I may, move on. Did you say that U.S. oil production has actually increased in every year during the Obama presidency, reversing an 8-year trend?
Yes, I did.
And how did that happen? I thought the President was opposed to fossil fuel exploitation and just liked sort of squishy renewable energy.
Well, it happened in large part because of things that were being developed over a period of a couple of decades, notably the shale oil, and shale gas liquids.
So it went up, not down, under President Obama?
That's correct.
The stimulus bill, we funded in the stimulus bill we put some R&D money into advanced battery research. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Did we not also put some money into advanced battery manufacturing?
That's correct.
And did that have any efficacious effect? Did that change the percentage of our world market share of advanced batteries manufactured in the U.S.?
Yes, it did. First, by producing in a higher quantity, and also it actually and meeting demands of Volt and Leaf and other manufacturers, it shifted the balance. We went from producing less than 1 or 2% of the world's advanced batteries to a capability of going up to 20 or 30%. And so it helped reduce the price of the batteries that are going into today's cars, and will further help reduce the price as in the next generation.
And positioning us competitively,
right,
where we were pretty much almost eliminated.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank the Chair.
The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, is now recognized.
Yield the Chairman. Few seconds.
Thank
No,
you.
every once.
You know, the gentleman from Virginia asked the question and you answered it as capacity. Isn't it true that, in fact, the actual amount of lithium-ion and other advanced batteries being placed in the United States is not significantly greater, and in fact, we continue both in photovoltaic and in battery production to see China effectively continuing to see our technology that we invest in, but ultimately be the place of choice for that purchase?
Well, actually, I think
when the government doesn't mandate buy in America.
I think the biggest competition was actually coming from Japan, Korea, and the batteries. But with that program, we did see a couple of U.S. manufacturers bring factories back home, which was very, very good. 8123 Broad Factory. I think we can give you a complete list.
We appreciate that. I thank the gentleman from Ohio, the home of Honda Motors, one of the great manufacturing companies. And I ask unanimous consent the gentleman have his full 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, Nancy Ann DePaul, White House Deputy Chief of Staff, financially entangled with Granite Reliable. Did that in any way influence your decision to give Granite Reliable a loan?
I didn't know she had any connection.
Yeah, with her son, she actually yielded a share to her son. Mr. Secretary, did the fact that Michael Froman, Deputy Assistant to the President, investor in Solar Reserve, did that in any way influence your decision to give Solar Reserve a loan guarantee?
No. Similarly, I did not know.
Mr. Secretary, did the fact that David Sandolau, Senior Advisor at Good Energy's, Assistant Secretary at Department of Energy, major investor in Solar Reserve, did that in any way influence your decision to give Solar Reserve a loan guarantee?
No.
Mr. Secretary, Steve Spinner, whose wife, law firm represents Solyndra, a former bundler for the President, Mr. Spinner was, did that in any way influence your decision to help Solyndra?
No.
Mr. Secretary, how about John Bryson, former chairman of the board at BrightSource, now the Commerce Secretary? Did that in any way influence your decision to give a loan guarantee to BrightSource?
No.
How about Peter Weeks, Mr. Secretary, Clean Energy Advisor at the Department of Energy for loan guarantee programs? Did he have any influence on whether decisions were based on politics, seeing how his experience on his resume says his only experience prior to was working in the presidential campaign?
No.
How about Mr. Secretary Sanjay Waggle, principal at Vantage Point Venture Partners, investor in BrightSource Energy? Did that in any way influence the Department of Energy's decision to give BrightSource a loan guarantee?
No, it did not.
Mr. Secretary, how about Larry Summers, former director at the National Economic Council at the White House, formerly with D.E. Shaw, an investment firm with a stake in the Kahuka Project? Did that in any way influence your decision to give a loan guarantee to Kahuka?
No, it did not.
How about Steve Wesley, Mr. Secretary, who bundled $500,000 for President Obama in the 2008 campaign? Did that have any influence on your decision to give a $465 million loan guarantee to Tesla, the company that he was involved with?
No, it did not.
Did anyone at any of these individuals I mentioned, did they in any way lobby you, talk to you about the respective companies that they had a stake in during the decision-making process with the 1705 program?
And to the best of my knowledge, no. In fact, this is a remarkable list because I was unaware of.
I just mentioned 9 people, Mr. Secretary, if I could, because I have a short time. I just mentioned 9 people representing 8 different companies. My understanding, there were 27 companies in the 1705 program who got a loan guarantee, 8 of which had connections, close connections with the administration, with the campaign. Do you see any kind of pattern? This is approximately 30% of the recipients in the 1705 program, close connections with the White House. Do you see a pattern or concern there?
No, I don't.
Do you think the American people might see a pattern if 30% of the folks were bundlers for the President, involved in the administration, sitting on the boards of the companies who received money, particularly companies like Solyndra that are now bankrupt? Do you think the American people might see a pattern?
Well, if the full record is revealed, I think you can look at some of the other financial backers of some of our loans who were prominent Republican donors. The fact is,
did the White House ever call you about, talk to you about any of these? Did you get someone from the White House, the Chief of Staff, someone from the White House talk to you about these respective companies with involving these individuals?
No, we did not. So
you weren't just helping your friends. You weren't just helping people who were politically connected to the administration.
That's correct.
Even though 30% of the loan guarantees went to people who had connections with the administration.
Well, as I said, we look at loans on their own merits. We don't look at who's backing.
Okay, so let me turn to that. So if you weren't helping your buddies and you were basing the decisions on the merits of the loan, how do you explain the fact that 23 of the 27 recipients of the loan guarantees were rated as junk status investments? How do you explain that fact? So, I mean, this is what my opening statement was about. If it wasn't your political buddies, it had to be incompetence, because tell me what organization would put money at risk in 23 companies out of 27 that are rated junk category, double B minus. And this is what the American people want to know about. Because there's no other conclusion you can reach. You helped your friends or you guys were incompetent. That is the only, when you look at the 1705 program, the facts are the facts. I don't see how anyone can arrive at any other decision.
When you look at the constraints and what we wanted to do with the loan program, which was to invest in innovative technologies, what that means, if you're a AAA rated company.
What does junk status mean? Double B minus. What's that mean? It means analysts expect these companies to fail. And yet you put millions of taxpayer dollars, American dollars, at risk in companies that S&P and Moody's, they expect to fail, and you put the money at risk. So you're telling me that's what you did because you didn't base it on your words. You didn't base it on the fact that these were political friends of the White House. So you had to base it on something, and it certainly couldn't have been the investment ratings that they were given by the investment companies, because that indicates that these companies are expected to fail when they're junk status.
Well, first, if you look at the statutes in the loan program, it said that we wanted to invest in innovative projects but had a reasonable chance of repayment. So, and if you look at the
don't you think
the gentleman's time has expired. If you just want to get a final answer.
I would just say, if a reasonable expectation of succeeding, then why did the ratings agencies say that they were junk status, which means they have a problem, they're probably going to fail. That's why they gave them the rating.
The Secretary may answer.
Very briefly, I think we can all look up what these ratings mean. And
I have. I have.
Rating.
I wish you guys would have before you gave the loans.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask, those are some strong allegations. At least give them a chance to answer.
I am.
Okay.
That's why I keep saying the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Secretary, we want to make sure you're fully able to answer a question. Please
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that courtesy. All I just wanted to say is that double B, single B, things of that nature are they're qualitative words. This can be quantified with FCRA ways of dealing with this. And the FCRA rules are saying that you try to assign as best you can. It's an art more than a science, a probability of failure. And so we used those FCRA rules to actually begin to quantify. If you look up in Standard & Poor's, Moody, you name it, any definition of these, they're more qualitatively. They talk about potential risks, things like that. So then it lands down to what's the probability of failure, and we feel that if it's got to have at least a 50% chance of succeeding.
Well, Mr. Secretary, because I want you to fully answer, do you have guidelines that say where you do or don't provide funding? Is there a point at which you're not supposed to provide funding based on these letters?
Well, we believe that it should be a better than 50% or better chance of repayment. The highest credit subsidies we gave actually at the time, and this was determined by OMB, were to a company like Ford, which turned out to be a good choice. But at the time, it was deemed by OMB to be risky.
Thank you. I'm sure there will be more questions. With that, we go to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to follow up on Representative Jordan's comments, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Is it ethical or unethical for a Federal employee to personally benefit from the decisions that they are involved with?
It's unethical.
So is it proper or improper for a Federal employee to personally, financially benefit from the decisions that they're involved with?
Yes, we have rules forbidding that, and very rules so that people don't get near that any gray area.
So if somebody does step over that line, what is the consequence?
We would probably turn it over to the IG for investigation.
Okay, so they go through this investigative process, but let's say there comes to a conclusion that they have stepped over this ethical line. What is the consequence for stepping over that line?
Well, again, it depends on the exact nature of what they did in the law, but we would certainly take this very seriously, and the IG would, I'm sure, would have a recommendation should that occur.
Have you turned over any of the names that Mr. Jordan talked about, or any others, over to the IG for further investigation?
Well, in the few cases that I know, most of those people I didn't actually know they had connections until today. But for example, in the case of Steve Spinner, he was actually firewalled from participating in any decisions regarding whether we make a loan to anything that he might have had a relationship to.
What about David Prend?
I don't know David Prend.
David Prend, you don't know
Prend,
David?
No.
He currently evidently serves on a panel to assist the DOE with solar technology issues. What about Steve Wesley?
Steve Wesley, I do know.
Has he been turned over to the IG yet?
No, because we, in deciding on the Tesla loan, he made no overtures, no phone calls, no instances to encourage us to make that loan.
What about Nancy Ann DeParle?
I didn't know she was connected with any of our loans.
But she turned over some of the assets that she had to her son. And Noble, she was sat on the board and owned interest in Noble Power. Noble owned a company called Granite Reliable, which received a partial guarantee of a $168.9 million loan from the Department of Energy. I guess, Mr. Secretary, one of the concerns is following up on that ethical standard. If there isn't a true and consistent standard that's not enforced, then it exacerbates the problem. And as Mr. Jordan rightly pointed out, there seems to be a pattern. There's so many names on this list. I just want to know personally, what are you doing to follow through on our concerns that these people were personally, financially benefiting from the decisions that they're in a position to influence people, where they had major financial gain on the upside of these loans? What are you doing about that?
Well, first, we look at any allegation and see if there's any merit to it. Also, what I have been doing, again, because there were no, certainly my ears would have perked up if I got phone calls from people saying, we want you to look at this loan, we encourage you to fund this loan. But we didn't receive those. But since this time and since people have brought up these connections, if you look at our loan portfolio, you also find very prominent people who've invested in companies we've given loans to, who are very prominent Republican donors. We simply didn't know that at the time, nor does it really matter, because we do not give loans based on.
I guess I'm worried about the people that work in your department, work in the White House, who are Federal employees who are personally benefiting in a group setting there where they have an opportunity to influence people in their decisions. That's the deep concern, Mr. Secretary. I don't see any evidence that you're following through and pushing these to the Inspector General. I just want to get an assurance that you're going to do that and that there are serious consequences for people who do step over those ethical lines.
Well, certainly our own General Counsel's office, they look at all these allegations as we do, and if we think it rises to a threshold where it deserves further scrutiny, we will turn them over to IG.
And just, I've got seconds here, but describe what that line is. What in your mind becomes unethical behavior?
If it turns out that any of these people were actually active in either actually lobbying or were part of any decision-making process for the loans, I think that would warrant.
The fact that they worked for the department or the agency and they personally benefited, does that not reach a threshold that's concerning to you?
If there are people who work for the department and if they're firewalled from being part of any decision, then, that's how we manage these potential conflicts of interest. And we do firewall them, and we're very scrupulous about trying to make sure that they have no influence on any decision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, they're going to bring you down an email. It was provided in our discovery, dated April 29th, 7:28, I guess that's a.m., I'd ask unanimous consent to be placed in the record. And at this time, I'd like you to read it and see if you want to reconsider whether or not there were contacts between the White House and DOE officials.
Well, okay, so I'm Daniel Tobin. I don't recall, I don't remember him. So you want me to read out loud or just read it?
Well, please. It's, I mean, you've said that there were no contacts. This clearly is a DOE official asking for the information of a entity that had not yet been given a loan, saying the White House wanted it.
Well, I don't know what the context of this email is, but it says, you know, can you, Steve, can you, I don't know, Steve Abley, I guess. Steve, can you provide the number of jobs that will be created during the construction, and what percentage of this product is U.S. content? I understand the majority of this equipment is from Germany. You have a breakout. Apparently, White House is asking for this information. Mike, I'm going to just, this is pure speculation as to what this was about. But certainly when we install and we provide loans, we would like to see a large fraction of the content of the wind, if we're installing a wind project, to be U.S., because it's U.S. jobs. And the good news is, as this project went forward, we started 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I'm not sure when the clock starts, but with 25% U.S.-made content on average, and now the wind turbines being constructed in the United States are about, according to the wind representatives, about 65% U.S. content. You know, automobiles manufactured by Chrysler, Ford, and GM are about 75% U.S. content. And so this is a good step. And so I'm guessing, and it's just pure speculation, that the concern was we don't want to be given loans that is largely non-U.S. content.
I appreciate that, and I would only ask that since our discovery did find this, if you would do a follow-up discovery under the same subpoena and deliver us succinctly all the all contents like this that appear to be involving applicants, DOE, and the White House.
Yeah,
since obviously there is at least one that does involve the applicant, DOE, and the White House.
I can do that.
And we'll loan you a bait stamp if that helps make sure that we get numbers on the next time.
Very good.
Thank you. With that, we recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Where are we?
I'm over here.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I would like to ask you a series of questions that you can answer for the record. And I would also like to submit for the record, Mr. Chairman, an article from the New York Times, September 10th, 2011, that is entitled, Employee Lawsuit Exacerbates Issues at Livermore Lab.
Without objection, so ordered.
Secretary Chu, I'm just going to run through these. The details of the fees the Department of Energy has been paying to the management company since 2008. An explanation as to why the workforce at Livermore Labs has shrunk to 6,800 full-time employees from 9,400, while federal funding has remained at 2007 levels of $1.2 billion. An explanation as to why the number of peer-reviewed published articles by Livermore Labs scientists has dramatically decreased since the Bechtel-led coalition has been in charge and has the contract. And finally, what oversight actions the Department of Energy has taken in response to cost overruns, degradation in capabilities, and lapses in security at the Livermore Labs. So you don't have to answer those at the moment unless you have some overarching comment you'd like to make, but I would like to have them made available to the committee at a later time.
So in respect for your remaining time, I will not answer it, but it certainly, I lived through that restructuring when it became from University of California to a limited liability corporation, which include 50%, I believe, University of California and a consortium of others. And at the time, we, the lab people, felt that this would be some of the fallout.
Okay, thank you. According to the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook, fossil fuel consumers worldwide received about 6 times more government subsidies than the renewable energy industry. Mr. Secretary, do you know how long we have been providing subsidies to the fossil fuel industry?
Well, it depends on which one you're talking about, but I believe oil started roughly 100 years ago. But, you know, we can get you the precise
All right.
types of subsidies.
According to a 2010 New York Times editorial, the oil industry has spent $340 million over the past 2 years lobbying against cuts to its subsidies. One of the reasons they argue for retaining the subsidies is retaining American jobs. But I note that despite heavy subsidies between 2005 and 2009, the top 5 oil companies have actually reduced the U.S. workforce by more than 10,000 workers. So it does not appear that the subsidies to oil companies are keeping jobs in the United States. Do you have any comments you'd like to make on that?
Well, it's very complicated, but certainly those major companies are doing well. They're large, stable companies making hundreds of billions in profits. And a lot of the new finds, the new gas finds, the new oil finds are started by independents, smaller entities.
So what would happen, Mr. Secretary, if we offered similar subsidies to clean energy initiatives?
Well, we think that it would help create an environment but that would stimulate this. But I, for one, I don't believe clean energy subsidies in wind and solar, for example, need more than, let's say, 20 years. The technology is improving very rapidly, and they can be ramped down because the technology is improving, and it will be competitive with any form of new energy. And so I think many people in this room would be agreeable to saying that there should be sunsets in all technology subsidies.
All right. In 2009, the University of Massachusetts issued a study called The Economic Benefits of Investing in Clean Energy. The study reported that investments in clean energy initiatives create 2 to 4 times more direct and indirect jobs compared to the same investments in oil and gas production. The report concluded that investing $1 million to retrofit buildings to make them more energy efficient creates 3 times more jobs than $1 million invested in oil and gas. Without getting into specifics, do you agree with the findings of this report?
Well, I can't say the exact numbers, but I do say that energy efficiency especially is something, by saving energy, you save money. The energy efficiency, the retrofits, the building of new buildings, new infrastructure in the United States, something we know can't be outsourced. And once you save that money, whether you're an individual, a resident, a business, that money gets recycled right back into the economy. And so we think that that is a very good way of making us more competitive, making us economically stronger, and stimulating our own economy.
Thank you. My time has expired.
I thank the gentlelady. We now recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Burkle, for 5 minutes. Would the gentlelady yield for 10 seconds?
Absolutely.
Isn't it true on a per megawatt basis that the subsidy to fossil fuel is a fraction of a subsidy to renewables at this time, that those are weighted based on very small amount of renewables, very large amount of fossil fuel?
I haven't looked at the numbers, but I would presume so because the amount of energy generated by fossil fuel still overshadows that of.
I thank the gentleman. The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, Secretary Chu, for being here this morning. I want to just refer to and reference a comment my colleague from District of Columbia mentioned about the 2% oil reserves that exist in the United States. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I'm not an expert on oil reserves. I've certainly heard that. But oil reserves are a very specific definition of what an oil reserve really means. But I've heard that number.
Thank you. And we've heard the President refer to that both during his campaign and in his State of the Union. I think the last figure he used was 3%. But I think it's important because the people throughout the country they need to know the truth. And if I look at these numbers here, that our country doesn't have just 2% of the reserves. At least 86 billion barrels of oil in the outer continental shelf, 24 billion barrels in shale deposits in the lower 48 states, up to 2 billion barrels of oil in shale deposits in Alaska, up to 12 billion barrels in ANWR, as much as 19 billion barrels in Utah. the tar sands, according to the Bureau of Land Management. All of these numbers are coming out of governmental agencies. There's a massive Green River Formation in Wyoming, which according to the USGS contains a stunning 1.4 trillion barrels of oil shale. And on it goes. Rand Corporation found that about 800 billion barrels of oil shale are in Wyoming and neighboring states. All told, the U.S. has access to 400 billion barrels of crude that's recoverable via existing drilling technologies. That's really very important for us to recognize that we do have more than 2% of the oil reserves, and that we can be energy independent if we just tap what's in the United States of America. We can become less dependent on the Middle East oils. And I think, as I sit here, it's so important for me to get a feel from this administration. Do you understand, and I'll just briefly mention my district, which is upstate New York, no mass transit and very cold weather. So we've got folks up there who must drive to work. And we don't measure in terms of blocks and miles like we do down here in Washington. They drive half an hour to work, just as my colleague from North Carolina mentioned. And beyond that, we live in a climate where the battery energy, the leafs and the volts, they don't work real well because they're so light. And in the weather and the snow that we have, last year we had over 200 inches of snow in my district. So they need heavy-duty cars that burn fuel. So my question to you this morning is, does the administration even begin to appreciate the pain at the pump that the American people are feeling? 70% of Americans drive automobiles. This issue is on their minds. And I'd like to see whether or not you think the administration is even aware of the pain that the people of America are feeling at the pump.
The administration, the President, and I personally feel that very much. That is and we actually know this pain, because if you're in a situation where you do have to commute and you do have to use your own car, it is causing great hardship.
Then, with all due respect, why aren't we tapping into the resources that exist in the United States of America so that I agree, all energy exploration, but from what I'm hearing, and we talked about the stimulus and the advantage of the weatherization program and the fact that it benefited 680,000 Americans, and I think the number you used was approximately $437 a year in savings. That's now being eaten up at the pumps. That's nothing. Any benefit, if you could possibly justify the stimulus plan, is gone out the window because this administration is not willing to be aggressive and establish a sound domestic policy here, energy policy, where we explore all energy possibilities, but we rely on the resources that exist in this country. And I think if we did, we'd see, and you mentioned it in your opening comments, supply and demand. Very simple. We increase the supply of oil. We send a message to other countries that we are not going to be dependent on you. We have the resources here, and I think you will see gas prices drop dramatically. And I would ask of you to go back to the administration and say, the American people are hurting. They need you to do something now. They need the Keystone Pipeline Initiative. They need this country to say, yes, we will do all forms of energy exploration, but primarily we will drill and we will make sure the American people have access to lower gas prices and we access all of the resources that exist in our country. I see my time has expired. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Secretary, if you wanted to respond, I don't want to have you cut off.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very, very quickly, the administration is supportive of increased production in the United States. Very aggressive program going on now through Secretary Salazar of Interior, much more land being offered for auction to decrease our dependency on imported oil, because we also recognize it creates jobs in America. So we are doing what we can in that respect.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good to see you, Mr. Secretary. While some have criticized individual and I think uncommon examples of disappointing results, I know of many successful recipients of Department of Energy grants. smart grid, clean cities, energy efficiency, environmental cleanup, renewable energy, hybrid technology. All of these and more are successful examples of Recovery Act funds administered by the Department. In my city, St. Louis, the Danforth Plant Science Center received funds via the Recovery Act for a project to determine how blue-green algae might be modified to produce fuel. Boeing received a smart grid grant via the Recovery Act to modernize the power grid. Washington University in St. Louis hosts one of 46 department-created energy frontier research centers. Researchers at the Photosynthetic Antenna Research Center are studying how plants harvest light and funnel energy in order to improve solar technology. As with all the organizations that receive ARA funds, PARC provides employment for staff at all levels. The city of Florissant, Missouri, in my district, was awarded Recovery Act funds through the department's Energy Efficiency Community Block Grant program. The funding covered installation of a new integrated solar panel roof system for the Civic Center. In addition, the grants provided funds for an energy audit and retrofit of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning units for all government-owned buildings. These projects not only provide jobs, they save a tremendous amount of money and energy. Also, Mr. Secretary, in my district in Hazelwood, Missouri, Emerald Automotive has developed an all-new lightweight range extended hybrid for fleet operators. The Emerald vehicle has a range of over 450 miles and achieves over 160 miles per gallon the first 100 miles driven. The vehicle reduces emission by 85% and saves the fleet operator considerable fuel costs. Testing on prototypes is currently being conducted, and the green vehicle will be produced in Missouri and sold domestically and in Europe. Mr. Secretary, Emerald has advanced through the early stages of the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program process with flying colors. There have been 2 rounds of questions from the Department, which have been answered promptly and thoroughly. Over 1,000 pages were submitted in the last round alone. The Emerald vehicle is exactly the type of project for which the ATVM loan program was created, yet the process has stalled. Mr. Secretary, what needs to be done to have DOE consider the Emerald application on its merits?
Well, as I said, we first consider all the applications strictly on the merits, and what we need to do is we have to decide how do you walk this balance between a company that is offering innovative, promising technology to our responsibility to the tax holders, that there's a likely chance of repayment. And this has always been the motivating factor in any decision we make.
And it's projects like these that create jobs that were the genesis of the Recovery Act. Is that correct?
Yes, but again, if I can't speak specifically about a specific loan, but it's again this balance between innovation that will help spur American innovation and leadership with the responsibility to the taxpayer.
Yeah, could you please talk about these other Recovery Act programs that have brought so many jobs and created so many innovations in my city and the rest of the country?
Well, some of those are grants. I don't know of all of them, but I know of some of them. There are research grants, EFRCs. We believe are very successful research grants, mostly to universities and groups to encourage professors to get together as a group and solve a problem rather than working as an individual research group, band together, because we think that if they do get together, 2 plus 2 can be more than 4. 1 plus 1 can be more than 2. And so we think that that has been very successful. The biofuels Danforth things, again, innovative. It's a grant. Danforth is a great organization. And so, again, all based on the merits, we're looking for ways of breaking through. Currently, the next generation biofuels is not competitive without subsidy. Let's say $80 barrel oil, and we want it, and that's our goal. We want it to be competitive without subsidy.
Well, thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I have one question for the gentleman, if I could. Was it wise to talk about all the grants you already got when you wanted to know about the next one you wanted?
I think it's cumulative.
It's cumulative. Okay. You've done well, my friend.
Thank you.
With that, we recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to ask you about your quote from 2008. Somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. Was there a specific country in Europe that you wanted to emulate, or would you have settled for a continent-wide average?
Well, as I said repeatedly, since I became Secretary of Energy, that was no longer my goal. That was no longer what I had to do as a government servant.
I understand that. You made that comment a few months before you were sworn in as Secretary of Energy, and I assume you meant it at the time you said it, or you would not have said it.
My duties as Secretary of Energy and my duties to serve the administration take on different aspects. And so when I became Secretary of Energy, I knew what I had to do. And for the good, and especially since we ended up going to this free-fall recession.
I understand that, but I also want to understand what you meant by that comment, which was just a few months before you were sworn in. So when you said somehow we have to figure out a way, who's the we? Somehow we have to figure out.
Again, I'd rather dwell on what my record has been in the Department since I became a public servant.
Mr. Secretary, when you said somehow we have to figure out a way to boost, the word boost has a specific meaning. It doesn't mean to let elevate. I mean, boost is intentional. What did you mean by the use of the word boost?
I'm not sure I said boost, but as I said, it's
what word would you have substituted?
Well, as I said, it's now irrelevant in my present job.
Do you know what the average price of gasoline in the United States was in 2008 when you made that comment?
It was not low, as I recall. It was we were suffering one of these gasoline price spikes at the time.
$3.50 a gallon. Do you know what the average price of a gallon of gasoline was in Europe when you made that comment?
Considerably higher than that.
About $8 a gallon. You have mentioned several times, in fact, you did it several times in one quote, the overall goal is to decrease our dependency on oil, to build and strengthen our economy, and to decrease our dependency on oil. Twice in one quote. The President, on the other hand, talks about decreasing our dependency on foreign oil. Why the distinction?
Well, we want to decrease our dependency on foreign oil because it's really exporting money out of the United States.
I understand why he uses the word foreign. What I'm asking is why you don't.
I think I use foreign. I think I use oil. I use them interchangeably because oil prices are an international, it's set by an international market.
You and Mr. Jordan were talking about probabilities, specifically with reference to bond ratings and investability. But what are the probabilities of a CCC rated company getting millions of dollars in government loan guarantees?
Well, a CCC plus is really at the edge of what I would consider the risk to the taxpayers.
So what would the probabilities of that of someone at the edge getting a loan?
Well, again, going back and looking at how the OMB, whose responsibility it is to set the credit subsidy, and the credit subsidy as it's set is literally, if one looks at the statute, there to offset the potential losses due to non-repayment of any kind, delinquencies. And so that credit subsidy score, so if the credit subsidy score is 50%.
The chances are 100% if you donated $30,000 to the President's reelection bid.
Sorry.
What about the probabilities of a B-rated company getting loan guarantees? That's not a very high rating either.
I thought we were talking about the probability as determined by the FICRA method.
Abound Solar and Solo Power, one of which was rated CCC, one of which was rated B, both of whom had principals that contributed minorly to the President's reelection bid, both of whom got loan guarantees. I've got 14 seconds. I want to ask you about subordinating taxpayer repayment for private investor repayment. Do you take the position that if there's a loan closing in the morning and by statute the taxpayers cannot be subordinated, that if you renegotiate that afternoon, you can negotiate them to get in line behind private investors?
No, I don't take that position.
What length of time has to pass before it can be restructured?
It's not a matter of length of time. As Herb Allison pointed out in his testimony, it's when a company goes into difficulty, one wants, and your goal is to benefit the taxpayer as much as possible, to give the chance that the U.S. government can get back as much as possible. Then Herb Allison in his report said that that restructuring is one of those tools.
I know I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman. My point was the statute's pretty clear. Taxpayers cannot be subordinated to other investors. Legal counsel for the Department of Energy has, in a case of mental gymnastics that I'm actually enviable of, says that only applies to the first structuring of the loan, not to subsequent structuring. So my question is, can you restructure it that afternoon according to her legal memo?
The gentleman's time has expired. The Secretary may answer.
Very quickly, I think there's no debate. The statute very clearly says in time of origination it can't be subordinated, and we follow that. The statute does not say when further on down the line what you need to do, and when asked whether it was wise to allow restructuring to continue, many people in the financial world say that if your goal is to maximize taxpayer benefit, that should be one of the tools.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you. For the record, because Mr. Conley has left, I just want to enter in. Oh, good. Mr. Conley is here. So for the record, from the EIA, U.S. Energy Information Administration, we currently use about 19,497,960 million barrels a day, of which we import 11,753,000. The arithmetic on that, and I'll put it in for the record without objection, indicates we still have not reached that lofty more than 50% at the present time, according to EIA's current figures. So we can all run around and figure it, but we're still not getting that far, and we're certainly not doing it on public lands. With that, we go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross.
Would the Chairman yield for 1 second?
Yes.
My only point was that we actually had reversed a trend in terms of domestic production. I think your point is well taken, and obviously more progress needs to be made.
Sure.
I thank the Chair.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. The problem we have, Mr. Conley, is that it was all reversed on private land, and in fact what we did was reversed the public lands being made available, made them less available. So one of the problems we have on this debate today is, yes, we have more oil and more natural gas. It's a result of private people doing on private land, and in some cases states like Texas who have special sovereignty. Well, in fact, the federal government, represented by the Secretary, and the other secretaries, Interior and so on, have actually reduced, they may be reversing it now, but they've reduced the availability for oil production. So it's one of those things where you can't take credit for that which you are deterring just because you're being overcome by the private sector working around it, if you will. Mr. Ross, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I want to follow up on what one of my colleagues earlier, Mr. Desjardins, was inquiring specifically with regard to single-access trackers as an innovation. It's my understanding that the Department of Energy recognized single-access trackers as an innovation. Is that correct?
as an innovation as it applied to that particular project.
And that particular project was the Antelope Valley Solar Ranch. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I want to just have, if you could take a look at the monitor there. There's a email or a memo from, looks like from Dong Kim to Jeff Walker, where he states specifically, someone keeps changing AVSR, meaning Antelope Valley Solar Ranch, technical slides to include single-axis trackers as an innovation. Be clear, this is not an innovation. The record will show that we did not grade this as innovative. Now, would you agree or disagree with that assessment?
Well, this is an email of Dong Kim, and as I tried to explain before, he later, for whatever reason, I don't know the particulars of it, he graded that as it's, is it the world's greatest innovation? Probably.
But he indicated it was not an innovation, and therefore Antelope Valley Solar Ranch got the loan guarantee of, what, $646 million? Wouldn't you say that's a mistake?
Well, you know, he actually wrote up the justification for these things, and ultimately it was a decision he and his group made. And so it was nothing, for example, I or anybody.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, I just want to make sure we get for the record. The I think it's innovative came first. The I know it's not innovative, stop trying to inject that came later. Could we agree to that? Because your documents delivered to us indicate that clearly he earlier allowed it to be considered innovative, later was overtly objecting to it being called innovative and actually objected to slides being put in that indicated it was innovative when it wasn't. I just want to make sure we get the order right, because the press has been given the assumption that he changed from no to yes, when in fact he changed from, yeah, it looks okay, to hell no.
Well, I actually can't speak to that because, again, I was not party to this back and forth internally within the career folk, and so we will gladly look at the full email chain and get that back to you.
And Mr. Ross, please continue, but we will in fact make sure you have the paper trail you provided us back, so that you understand that this was one of those where it is $500 million that would not have occurred had you listened to his later guidance. And I'd ask unanimous consent that gentlemen have the additional minute that I took, without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to ask unanimous consent that the memo from Dong Kim, dated August 4th, 2010, to several other recipients be admitted into the record, and I'll submit that to the Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chu, you indicated in your opening statement that each one of these cases, speaking of criminal indictments, was unacceptable, and we have taken aggressive action to address issues early on and hold responsible parties accountable. Does it just take a criminal indictment to hold somebody responsible and take remedial action, or have you taken remedial action on these other matters that have resulted in absolute failure?
No, absolutely not. If you look at some of, for example, in a very small amount of the cases in weatherization, if someone does shoddy workmanship, I'm not sure.
Has anybody been let go as a result of any of these failures? Have you terminated anybody's employment with DOE as a result of these projects, whether it be Solyndra or anybody else?
No.
And loan guarantees.
Well, I haven't.
And what remedial action then have you taken to guarantee that this won't happen again? Or have you taken any remedial action?
We have. We've taken remedial action. For example, in the cases where we found shoddy workmanship, things of that nature, we tell the contractor, you've got to go back, you've got to fix it on your own.
And you still use these same contractors?
In some cases, well, I can't see. This is...
I guess what I'm getting at is there has not been an established guidelines that have been implemented as a result of remedial action to be taken to make sure this doesn't happen again. Is that correct?
There were established guidelines, but you have to also understand that our weatherization programs, we give money to the states give to local organizations. We oversee what the states and those local organizations do, and we have very clear guidelines. If there's any improper work.
So you would be willing to bet then that these instances will not happen again? The Solyndras, the Antelope Valley Solar Ranches, the excessiveness in the weatherization program that have proved to be, as you've seen in the slides, totally abject failures. It's your testimony today that you've taken remedial measures to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
We always look to ways of improving both our oversight of the Recovery Act and our oversight of the business we have in the Department of Energy. But it's just as when Macondo happened, and we worked very hard to help stop that leak.
Let me ask you, let me shift real quickly, because I also want to get on this. We talked about oil production, and we talked about oil production being up under this administration. Now, we're talking about crude oil production, correct?
Yes.
We have not increased refined oil production, have we, in the United States?
I actually don't know about that.
Have we been, how much have we been exporting of our crude oil production?
Well,
has that increased under this administration?
I think the correct question you meant to ask was, what are the net imports or exports? Because there's
of crude or refined.
I think both.
Okay, good answer.
Because depending on the refineries, how sour or sweet the crude is, so there's a little bit of going back and forth of crude.
We've increased our exports of refined oil, have we not?
Again,
and would not increase in production, even from the drawing board, as an economist, affect the market rate of crude oil prices, even if it takes 10 years to develop?
The Secretary may answer.
As I said, the thing that affects prices, yes, supply, demand, very, very important. All the things that affect prices are the amount of spare capacity. Other things that affect prices are forward-looking things and nervousness about international events. All of those things affect the international price of oil.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. My staff has given me the two documents we've been talking about, and we're going to post them on our website prominently so that the August 4th, 2010 statement from Doug Kim, or Dong Kim, which is on your website as your answer to justification, is placed next to the June 2011, 8 months later, when he says, these are not innovative. I would ask that you consider strongly putting the correction, the 8 months later, on the website so that the public stops thinking that he thought it was innovative when, in fact, 8 months later, well before funding, he said clearly it wasn't. And with that, we go to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. And Secretary, thanks for being here today. And you're in a very tough position. And I really would suggest that it's really not the pain at the pump that's affecting a lot of the comments anymore. It's the pain at the polls. That's certainly driving the great interest in how we're going to solve this nation's energy problems. And I've got to tell you, I was very impressed with your resume. You certainly are, and the Chairman said it earlier, one of the smartest people that has ever been here. In your statement, you said, I've spent my career as a scientist. Rigorous peer review and double-checking someone else's findings are fundamental to a sound scientific process. And I believe the same is true in government. The American people expect all of us to honestly assess the investments we've made and chart a course for the future. You also were talking about job creation and things that have happened. And I'm a little bit confused because when I look at the claim that there's over 60,000 jobs created, I say, okay, well, 33,000 of those jobs for the advanced technology vehicles for Ford. Those people are already at Ford. So you didn't really create those. That's just now they wearing a little different cap. 3,000 at Cylinder that's bankrupt. 240 at Poet, which declined the loan. 188 at Abound, which is that have been laid off, and 34 at Beacon went bankrupt, and 26 at Fisker that were laid off. Actually, the net total is 24,900. So if we're going to inspect other people's data and other people's findings, then we really need to get down to the actual empirical data that we have to deal with. It is nowhere near 60,000 jobs. It's just about half that amount, and a lot of that is dubious also. When I hear about this increased production in oil under this administration, and this is not an original quote, but it is very much like the crowing rooster taking credit for the daybreak. Just because you happen to be sitting in a position that's benefiting from years of technology coming now into fruition. And I know a little bit about it. My family has a 147-year background in energy production. Fracking is 60 to 70 years old. It isn't new. So I think that we sometimes get these things twisted around when it comes to a political re-election as opposed to real answers for our energy problems. And I've got to tell you that I'm trying to understand as a private citizen and one who has borrowed great deals of money from time to time. I thought it was a great deal of money for me because I actually had to pay it back. I have my own skin in the game. But when I look at some of these loans, and I'm trying to understand, now this is maybe not you, but you have a team of people that would be approving these loans. Mr. Jordan asked about it, Mr. Chaffetz asked about it, and my colleagues have asked about it. There's no way in heck anybody could have looked at these if it was their own money. If you were truly a lender who was responsible to a group of investors for the way your money was being lent, you would say, no, 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 we can't invest this way. There's something called the 5 C's that comes up, and most lenders would talk to you about it. It's character, capacity, capital, collateral, and conditions. All of those come into effect before any loan is given out to any person trying to borrow it. But I wonder, as a scientist, and you say about, I wanted to check, I wanted to double check. There's no way anybody double checked or nobody looked at these things. This isn't science. This is a basic business model that has failed dramatically, and it has failed with American taxpayer money. So this idea that we are these benevolent monarchs just showering these favors to these folks is absolutely preposterous. We have wasted so much money. And a lady from California was asking about, fossil fuels produce 78% of American energy, 13% of the tax incentives. Renewables, they're responsible for 11% of production, and they get 77% of tax incentives. So we're asking, which one did you want to eliminate? I'd say, you know what? I think I'll put my money on a horse that I think can win. So I really do. I wonder, and it's sitting there as a private citizen, coming here for the first time, an automobile dealer my whole life, having to fund everything myself, having collateral, having character, having the ability to have great deals of money, capital of my own to invest in any type of a way out project before any lender would even look at me, is incredible to me that we've gotten to this point today where we have wasted billions and billions of hard-working American taxpayer money on some green dream that isn't playing out very well. I got to tell you, this is the House of Representatives, represents the people of the United States. I don't come here as a Republican. I come here just as an American, and I hope my friends from the other side feel the same way. The American people deserve to know, how could we have been so careless and so casual with billions of taxpayer dollars? In 1703, Section 1703, we were looking at nuclear, fossil, and renewables. We went to Section 1705, you know what we completely left out? Nuclear and fossil. And it's all renewables. I just don't understand anybody's economic model that looked at something that was such a long shot and saying, you know what, I think this is right. I think this is what we should go for. In fact, what you really drove out of the market were the venture capitalists. And I'd like to submit for the record a letter from Bright Automotive.
Without objection, so ordered.
This is I think we have a slide on this too. When Reuben Monk...
I'd ask the gentleman to have an additional 1 minute.
Okay.
Without objection, so ordered.
All right. All right. Dear Secretary Chu, this is February 28th. This is very, very recent. Today, Bright Automotive will withdraw its application for a loan under the ATVM program administered by your department. Bright has not been explicitly rejected by the Department of Energy. Rather, we have been forced to say, uncle. As a result, we are winding down our operations. Last week, we received the 4th, near final, conditional commitment letter since September 2010. Each new letter arrived with more onerous terms than the last. The first 3 were workable for us, but the last was so outlandish that most rational and objective persons would likely conclude that your team was negotiating in bad faith. We hope that as their secretary, this was not at your urging. And as you look at this, I mean, we really have driven the venture capitalists out of the market because, you know what, they cannot compete with a group of bureaucrats that have absolutely no background but are making decisions that would have been made by them based on the likelihood of a good investment. So the Energy Department may well-intentioned, but has absolutely destroyed a part of the investment industry through an absolutely preposterous model that has no basis to be even looked at and said, you know what, these were good decisions based on good information. If it had a 50% chance of survival, I'd like to talk to one lender that would have said, thumbs up on that one. Just wouldn't have happened. So I railed back my time.
Mr. Secretary?
Well,
there wasn't a question there.
I don't think there was a question, so.
Okay. With that, we'll go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Chu, thank you for being here. I applaud your taking the time to be here, and I'm happy to see we've got somebody in charge of an organization that actually has a scientific background. Let's talk a little bit about natural gas, if you don't mind. natural gas is cheap and abundant right here in America, and lower natural gas prices in some areas of the United States. Well, they are at historic lows. Just for the record, would you say that falling natural gas prices reduce the favorableness of the business model for some of these alternative energy sources? Maybe one of the reasons they're less able to compete is we can throw a proven technology natural gas power plant on and put, $2.60, $2.70 natural gas in it?
I would certainly agree that falling natural gas prices, especially where they are today, makes natural gas very competitive with other forms of energy.
And so now that we've got relatively low natural gas prices, and we actually do see the oil and gas sector ramping up employment in South Texas, we're under 7% unemployment, actually looking at jumping under 6. We're actually having trouble finding people to work in the oil field. Do you think this might be an opportunity for us to invest in technologies to export some of that natural gas, to bring money into the United States in the energy sector and lower our balance of trade?
Well, first, we're very, very happy that the natural gas boom and the ability to recover natural gas, and where we thought 20 and 30 years ago was not recoverable. We're very excited about that. As you noted, it's creating a lot of jobs. We also think that natural gas is a good transition fuel. In weighing whether we export natural gas, and the Department of Energy is undertaking a study to see whether we should be doing this. And I just want to add very briefly that it lumps into two things, into fair trade countries, which we have no choice, we approve, and non-fair trade countries, which we have to weigh what's in the overall benefit of the United States.
It just seems like we shouldn't be treating energy any differently than we treat our farmers, our automakers, our airplane makers. We encourage exports in those fields, and it seems like doing the opposite in the natural gas field might be a mistake and might be an opportunity to lower. And as far as you also mentioned the term transition fuel, transition to what?
Well, to a lower carbon intensive economy. Natural gas emits about less than half the carbon dioxide of the average conventional coal plants, while we work to do research to help coal plants capture and sequester the carbon dioxide, which we are also very committed to. We do see, particularly with these low gas prices, that the power companies will shift the balance somewhat to natural gas. They won't go all the way, because they too don't want.
Obviously, you want a diversification,
right?
A diversification of fuels. But I would encourage your department to be expeditious in approving permits to do export. Before I finish, I do want to ask you about a company called Abengoa. I think it was $132 billion. It had the lowest rating in the entire DOE profile, lower than Beacon Power or Solyndra, both of which have gone bankrupt. Are you concerned about having loaned money to this risky venture?
Well, we look at all our loans. We're very careful. We're very mindful of risk to taxpayer money, and we monitor these situations. And frankly, what has happened in the solar industry and solar manufacturing is no one really anticipated that the price of solar modules, the bidding price, would drop to only 20% of what it used to be some 4 years ago.
It brings up the issue of kind of a lack of diversification within the DOE profile. You've got Abengoa, First Solar, Project AMP. They received about half of the 1705 program funds, or about $7 billion. Shouldn't we be inconsistent with all of the above energy that the President has said, and that we Republicans have been touting all along, be looking at diversifying that over a wide variety of different projects rather than dumping half of it in 3 questionable programs?
Well, we in 1705, we invested in solar, we invested in wind, we invested some geothermal. In our other loan programs, for example, we invested in nuclear. We have a conditional commitment to Vogtle for the first 2 nuclear reactors that we've started for the last 30 years. There are loans in the 1703 program for gasification of coal. And so there are other parts of our loan program that include those technologies.
It looks like it was 80% of went to solar in 1705. So we'll look at the numbers with respect to the other programs, but just the heavy investment in solar has me concerned. I'm out of time, so
we'll have a second round for the gentleman if he'll remain. Secretary Chu, I just want to verify one thing. 1703 was essentially all the previous administration. 1705 was your administration. So when the gentleman's talking about what was funded under 1703, including nuclear and other forms of fossil fuel, those were the Bush administration. Yours is 1705, which is essentially no nuclear, no fossil fuel. Is that correct?
Not quite. I think 1705 was authorized in, I think, 2007. And so,
right, but it's what you've acted on during your administration.
Well, before this administration, no loans in 1703 or 1705 went out.
Okay, I think I'm not going to take it as my time because it isn't my time. We now go to the gentleman from my college hometown, Mr. Wahlberg, for 5 minutes.
And we are better off because of it, I'm certain.
I hope Sister Peg is listening to that as we speak.
She is listening and wondering why. Michigan, the motor capital of the world. Michigan rebounding. Michigan, in my district, and I think all over, frustrated with the high cost of using those excellent vehicles that are produced in Detroit and other areas of Michigan and around this country. But we're not going to relinquish that standard that we have and the desire to give people resources of transportation that they want. And I know it seems right now, at least from my perspective and that of my constituents, that their government is attempting to do mind changing, whole process changing, moving to some other direction that, frankly, they're not accepting at this point in time. And primarily in the 9 town hall meetings I had last week, I just heard from my constituents saying, reduce the cost of gas at the pump. Get us what we want on that area, and then take the next 200, 600, 800 years to find all of the resources that you think will come following that. I know they're not committed to destroying our environment, but they want an economy in this country that promotes them. In your testimony, Secretary Chu, you stated clearly that where we find mistakes, we have and we will move swiftly to correct them. Project AMP received $1.4 billion loan commitment from the Department of Energy. The Recovery Act required projects to commence construction before 2011, by September of 2011. We checked in February of 2012, and still Project AMP had not commenced construction. What is your response to that? Is that not a mistake? Is that not a violation? And what will you do?
I'd have to get back to you on that one, and so we will look into it.
Well, I guess I go back on the question and stated that you said where we find mistakes we have, and we will move swiftly to correct them. If indeed the requirement is that the project where someone receives the AMP, or this specific Project AMP, received $1.4 billion loan commitment, and they haven't commenced construction yet as of February 2012, when they were supposed to commence it by September 2011, what other answer would be other than we ought to be withdrawing?
Again, I would going to look into the exact things in commencing construction, whether it's an obligation, but I would certainly look into it and get back to you on whether it satisfies the statute of law.
My colleague, Congressman McHenry, asked what you had done and this administration had done to lower gas prices. You spoke of programs to improve engine efficiency and other vehicle technology. The Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program is a Bush-era program designed to assist manufacturers of advanced technology vehicles. Do you know where the last ATVM loan was issued? When the last ATVM loan was issued?
Not off the top of my head.
April 2011. Do you know how many companies are awaiting a loan at this time?
I know. I, again, don't know the exact number. There are a number of loan applicants right now.
Well, with the lack of knowledge or seemingly attention to this detail, why does the Department of Energy website tout the ATVM as a jobs program?
We have, you were asking me for an exact count of the number of loans applications that are before us, and so I was just saying that I did not know the number. It is a jobs program.
I'll take a guesstimate. Any guesstimate on it?
4, 5, 6, I don't know.
So again, why do we list this as, or tout it as a jobs program if it seems pretty insignificant in a time when we have energy concerns that are frustrating people at the pump? And
well, it's a program where that was set up in a previous administration. We believe that it did a lot of good. It said the loans to Ford and Nissan created and saved a lot of American jobs, and I think you'd agree with that.
One final question, Mr. Chairman, if I could.
I'd ask the gentleman to have an additional minute without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Simple question. When will oil production go up on federal
leases?
Lands. We tout all of the oil production that's going up, but it's on private lands through effective efforts that have gone on with permits that have given in past administrations on average 73% of the permits requested were approved. This administration 23%. So when will oil production go up on federally leased lands?
You know, sir, I can't rightly say, but if you look at the amount of federal leased lands under the control of oil companies, it's increasing. The oil companies have to make a decision and as to whether they want to develop on those lands. The President actually has encouraged them to do this when he suggested, begin development or lose it. There was a great objection by the oil companies, and so we can do what we can to encourage oil companies to develop their leases that they now own on federal lands.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the extra time. I would just question if they are pushing back, there is a significant reason why they're pushing back on using lands that they've requested to use. Thank you.
If the gentleman would yield.
I would yield. Mr.
Secretary, how do you explain that on private lands where they pay at or greater than the 17.5% royalty they pay to the public on public lands, they're choosing to go to private lands, and you're saying, or your administration is contesting, that they're choosing not to go on public lands. Public lands should be cheaper based on our typical royalty of 17.5%, but in fact, they're going and buying rights on private land. How do you explain that?
Well, most of the land the government's been leasing is in offshore, deep water. There's Arctic also made available. Those, by their very nature, are harder to develop than this new technology, which over the last 10 years has improved remarkably. And so that's why you see this great proliferation of rigs and things of that nature. It's on land. It's become a technology that we know how to use, and the initial up-cost investment and the time of development is much shorter.
I appreciate that. I will mention that Prudhoe Bay is a term we've been using since I came here 12 years ago, and we have not approved the request they've made in the ANWR. And with that, we begin our second round with Mr. Kelly, who has waited and kept the President even waiting for an opportunity. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary, you didn't have much of a chance to respond. When it comes back to Bright Automotive, there's a report that you had a conversation with Amy Dobrakova, a former employee, and that was as recent as March 5th, 2012 at the Green Fleet Conference, that you knew a year and a half ago that Bright wasn't going to be able to qualify for this loan. Is that true?
I had a conversation with the woman. That's not what I said. We felt that for a long period of time, this looked like a very iffy proposition, and although very sympathetic to the company and to her, we did not, we did not, quote, know long ago, but it was on the margin for a long period of time based on our market analysis, based on all the other things that would entail the risk to the taxpayer money.
Well, and I guess that's part of the question, because the same thing is with Fisker. We're asking them to push science forward to meet a market demand. Or there's not a market demand for it, but we're saying the science has got to come into line right now. We've got to do things quicker. Tell me a little bit about Fisker, because Fisker's going through the same situation right now where all of a sudden it's what they were told they were going to get in total. They've only gotten part of it because they haven't met some of the metrics I think that the Department has asked them to do. What is it that they're coming up short at?
Well, I'm not going to talk specifically about any specific loan, but I'll tell you in general what we have in our program and our loans, and that is we have milestones. And if and so as we meet out and disperse the funds, companies have to meet milestones, and if they don't, we enter into discussions with them to see what can be done. And and in general, we think this is a very responsible stewardship of taxpayer money. And so, not going into any details of any company, we're just saying that we do take the responsibility of to the taxpayer very seriously.
In some instances, not in all, because as we've seen before in previous instances, there were monies given out to companies that had this BB- rating and really didn't have the metrics in place. Now, going back to the conversation you had with Amy Dobrakova, are you saying that the New York Times misquoted you?
The conversation that I recall was that I said we had our doubts about Bright Auto, and we were trying to work through with the company how to get the loan, and so that's the conversation I recall.
Okay, because there is an audio of that, but this is what I was referring to earlier. So if we're taking people who would normally, venture capitalists who would get involved, and we've taken them, quite basically, we've taken them out of the equation now because bureaucrats now are making decisions on investing capital, not their own, but taxpayer money. And so tell me where this is going, because it really does change the dynamics of the lending environment right now. And I don't know how people would go forward if they're not sure. Where does the government get off? Where do the venture capitalists have their opportunity, or where is their niche in that market?
Okay, so first, there's a slight definition difference of we're providing not capital but debt. But regarding your second statement about venture capital, the loan program actually does not compete with venture capital. Venture capital typically invests smaller tranches of money in earlier funding, things that would be considered too risky for our loan program. So it wasn't intended to compete with venture capital.
Okay. So let me go into Fisker then. Where's Fisker right now?
Again, I can't talk to the particulars of any loan, and so I hope you would understand that.
Well, I understand that, but I'm not sure Fisker does, because they bought a plant in Delaware, a former GM plant. Tesla bought a former GM plant in California, and a lot of this is predicated on the fact that private investment and government investment is which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Do we have to get the private money in first before we qualify for the government money? And from the private sector, they're saying, well, unless you have a guarantee on the loan, we're not willing to put more money into it. So I'm kind of confused, as anybody that I actually have had to borrow a lot of money in my lifetime. I'm trying to understand, where is it that this fits and would give anybody who was actually seeking one of these loans any type of a clear avenue as to how you would obtain this funding and how you would go forward?
Well, I think those requirements we hope are reasonably clear, because it's written into the statute that when we offer either a loan guarantee or something of that nature, that a minimum of 20% has to come from private equity investments or investments some other way. In some instances, the government is following considerable investments in the private sector, and then the company comes forward and says, we'd like to do another project which we will think fits in the scope of the definition of the loan program, and therefore they would ask.
Yeah, I know Fiskars run into some trouble. In fact, their car wouldn't start when they had it at one of the shows to start. They couldn't get it to start, and I know that they're facing some great difficulties. But and I've run out of time. I do appreciate you being here today, and I know you're in a tough position. But on behalf of the American taxpayers, we really have to be looking into these things. It just seems to me that so far we don't have a very good positive rate of return on what we've invested. So thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yield back. With that, we go to the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Secretary, a little bit earlier, Mr. Jordan asked you a series of questions where he mentioned people who may have had some connections with the administration of the White House. And I think we have to be very careful with those, because basically what he's asked you is to go back and to look into that, which I know you will. And if I were those people, I'd be concerned as a lawyer, because there's an implication that they may have done something wrong. You said that a number of those people you didn't even know. You knew some of them. Others you did not know that. You may have known them, but you didn't know they had involvement. And then I think there was one or two people that you said there had been a firewall put up. Is that correct?
Well, there's firewalls put up on any person who works within the Department of Energy who would have any connection with a loan applicant, or actually a grantee of any kind. And the firewalls are that that person cannot in any way participate in any part of the selection process.
And I had asked you about First Solar, and the Washington Post said that one of Senator John McCain's, and this is the same project, by the way, that John McCain spoke up for, and Governor Brewer. But the Washington Post went on to say that a fellow named William Post was a top bungler for Senator McCain, and he got and he served on the company's board of directors for this First Solar. But that had nothing to do with First Solar getting an opportunity, did it?
No. Whether the investors are Republicans or Democrats did not enter into any decision as to whether we're going to fund a loan.
Now, last November, then White House Chief of Staff William Daley appointed Herb Allison to conduct an independent study of DOE's loans and loan guarantees to clean energy projects. The independent consultant was responsible for completing three tasks. Number one, evaluating the current status of the loan portfolio. Two, recommending ways to strengthen and management of the oversight of DOE's loan program. Three, proposing an early warning system for spotting potential problems that could affect the value of the loan portfolio. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Now, the independent consultants report acknowledged that Congress directed DOE to support, quote, innovative and, quote, alternative energy projects that involve more risk than is typical for a project and corporate debt financing. Mr. Secretary, your agency has an important mandate to fund these innovative clean energy projects, but to do so in a way that does not waste taxpayers' investment. I think you've actually said that. Can you discuss what due diligence procedures you put in place in the loan guarantee program to help ensure that DOE balance both of these interests?
Sure. So, for example, our experiences, for example, in the solar market, where the ecosystem of that market, the cost of a commodity goes down by that much, made us acutely aware that this is something we had to monitor on a weekly basis, if you will, and monitor very closely. The other thing that we have instituted and we continue to strengthen, and we agree with the Allison report, in fact, it started this before the Allison report, was that we had to start a separate organization within the Department of Energy, another organization, yes, part of the loan program, but actually is independent set of eyes, certainly independent from the originators of the loan, that could then say, the responsibility of the taxpayers' money. If things are in trouble, it's often said that the parents sometimes look through rose-colored glasses at their children, and originators of the loan, in a certain sense, were parents of those loans. And so we felt it very important to establish an independent set of eyes with people not only within the loan program, but people outside the loan program per se. So these are examples of some of the things we've begun.
And GAO recently issued a report finding that your department's due diligence procedures were as good, if not better, than procedures used by private sector investors. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, we hear that from our loan applicants all the time, that we somehow put them through a lot more diligence.
Now, there's been this whole concept of drill, baby, drill. Folks seem to believe that that's going to, that's unanimous.
An extra 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Can I have a minute like the Republicans? Thanks. The Republicans have been touting the drill, baby, drill, as if that's going to reduce gas prices. And, I remember when we had gas price hikes and President Bush was around, I reminded my colleagues that there's certain limitations that we have. Can you, it's been implied that that you all are not doing all that you can to reduce gas prices. And I just want to, since the American people may see this, I want you to be able to tell them what you are doing.
Well,
and if that drill, baby, drill thing works.
First, as noted several times, this is a world commodity. It depends on the world structure. We actually like the idea that the United States is increasing its production of oil and natural gas. This is good. It means American jobs. So we're supportive of that. I've listed that before. In the previous administration, I twice was asked to help spent an hour and a half with President Bush in the Roosevelt Room with a few others to try to help get relief at the pump. He wanted to know about biofuels and things of that nature. I spent another time, over an hour, after working with the Secretary of Energy, with Secretary of Treasury, Hank Paulson, with the head of NEC, Jack Hubbard, and the Secretary of Energy, to look at, in previous administration, what can the Department of Energy do to bring relief? And so, in the previous administration, I was asked to give my ideas on what they could do. It has not changed since this administration. And there again, I was at the service of a previous administration who also felt the pain of Americans at the pump.
Thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes. Oh, I will notify everyone, we anticipate coming out of recess and going into a vote. Mr. Secretary, the earlier of the two of that vote, or 1 o'clock, will be your reprieve, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
I thank the Chairman. Let me just pick up where the ranking member started his time. I wasn't implying anything with my questionings. I was simply trying to get at how the Department of Energy made their decisions. And that's why I referenced 9 different individuals who are either in the administration or were fundraisers for the Obama campaign, 8 of which have ties to companies in the 1705 loan program, if that had any bearing, any influence on the Department of Energy's decision to give those companies with ties to 8 of those 9 individuals who were in the administration who were fundraisers for the Obama campaign, if that had any bearing on their decision to give those companies loan guarantees. The Secretary's response was no to all 9 of those individuals. He said then, we base our decisions on the merit of the company who's going to get the loan, who's going to get taxpayer dollars, which prompted me to ask, if it's based on merit, why were 23 of the 27 companies who received money rated as junk status by Fitch and Standard & Poor's? The Secretary seems to since then referred to this independent review that was done. And so I want to spend a little time on that if I can. Who conducted the independent review?
It was led by Herb Allison.
And did Mr. Allison have any ties to the administration?
I can't know the exact, oh yes, I do know one tie. I think he was part of Treasury for a while.
So the guy who did the independent review was also formerly a member of the Obama administration?
I believe so.
Yeah. And what was his title? Do you know?
I can't give you the exact title, but I think he was part of trying to, he's working with Freddie Mac and Freddie Mac.
Yeah, he was Assistant Secretary at the Treasury Department. Is that right?
Again, I don't remember his exact title.
But it's true that the guy who did the independent review was also formerly a member of the Obama administration.
Yes.
Okay. And so, and what did his, and his review said that it's okay to give loans to 23 companies that are rated junk status?
He did not address that. He was asked, his charge of his committee and his report was going forward how to help ensure the taxpayer interests and the vitality of the loan program.
And isn't it true in his report that he said, quote, serious systemic technical and management problems exist at the Department of Energy? Isn't that a direct quote from Mr. Allison's review?
I don't recall those words.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they're in there. Let me ask you. Let me back up a second. Do you think maybe the American taxpayer who saw millions of their dollars put at risk at 23 companies with junk-rated status, do you think maybe when you have an independent review done by a former member of the Obama administration, do you think they might question whether, in fact, it was independent? Particularly when some of these companies went bankrupt with their tax dollars?
It was a very independent review, and the high standards of which Herb Allison and his people conducted a review have to be applauded. I should also say that...
But here's what I keep coming back to, and I don't see how a rational person can't at least think this may exist. 9 individuals in the administration or raising money for the Obama campaign, you say that has no bearing on who gets loans. 23 to 27 companies that got loans, investment grade or below investment grade status, junk status. And then you hire someone to do an independent review. And oh, by the way, the independent reviewer, he also worked in the Obama administration. So, I mean, really? That's how you're going to defend yourself as someone who was previously in the Obama administration, does the independent review. That's supposed to be independent to justify the fact that all these connections exist and 23 of the 27 companies weren't investment grade. Unbelievable. The taxpayers sitting back and they're going, are you kidding me? This is what goes on with our tax dollars in one of our federal agencies? The guy who's supposed to justify all these actions with independent review actually worked in the administration. That is amazing. That goes on with American tax dollars. That's the point that the American people find so frustrating and so troublesome when they look at this entire situation.
When the loan program was set up, it was set up to fund innovative companies. And it was also set up with a loan loss reserve, which was specifically set aside. So this is money appropriated, not money, this is real dollars appropriated by Congress to account for losses. And Herb Allison's report said that in the monies available for this loan loss reserve of about $10 billion, they estimate that perhaps 2.7, less than one-third is at risk. And they also said that we don't say that they're going to lose 2.7. So it's far less than what Congress appropriated for those losses.
Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Chairman, look, you can...
Would the gentleman yield for a second?
I've made my point. I'd be happy to yield to the chairman of the full committee.
Mr. Secretary, notwithstanding where your independent Mr. Allison was before, he clearly shows us that if not for Nissan and Ford, you'd have had a disastrous result. That in fact, when you pull them out, this is an awful performing portfolio. It's only Ford and Nissan coming back that actually improves it, and he includes things in his own. A lack of clarity in lines of authority within the loan program, lack of balance between those in government experience and those with substantial private sector experience and skill in the project. As I read it, he pretty much said you didn't do that good a job, and he does give you credit for the loan loss being less, but when you take Ford and Nissan out, it's more, isn't it?
Well, one can take this out, put that in, and things of that nature. He also points out...
Well, but no, wait a second. But the reason I'm asking about take them out is these are world-class, huge companies.
Yeah, that's...
And when you take Ford and Nissan, you're not talking about these BBCC startup companies with, quite frankly, as Mr. Jordan said, insiders, friends of the presidents, bundlers, and so on. So they are very different. The characteristic of the loans might be similar in amount, but the characteristics of the companies bear no resemblance, do they?
Well, you can say that today, and everybody recognizes Ford has bounced back beautifully. It's a great company.
Ford is a 100-year-old business worldwide, and Nissan came out of World War II and has gone almost straight up for 2 generations. So I think in fairness, you cannot compare auto companies to the startup electric companies and so on, can you?
The credit subsidy for the Ford loan speaks for itself. It was roughly 50% of the loan. So in the eyes of the OMB, who sets that credit subsidy score, they felt that it had a 50% chance of default at the time. But it turned out not to be, and we applaud Ford for doing all the things it did, and it's a great company.
We all agree on that part. Mr. Clay, would you like a second round? The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And last July, the Brookings Institution issued a major study providing the first comprehensive analysis of the U.S. clean energy economy. That report made a number of findings, and I would like to focus on 2. First, the report found that the clean economy generates good-paying jobs. According to the report, the clean economy employs about 2.7 million workers. That's more than the fossil fuel industry. The report said this, and I quote, "Newer clean tech segments produced explosive job gains, and the clean economy outperformed the nation during the recession. Newer clean economy establishments, especially those in young energy-related segments such as wind energy, solar, and smart grid, added jobs at a torrid pace, albeit from small bases." Secretary Chu, do you agree with the Brookings report that certain segments of the clean economy, particularly those whose Recovery Act monies have been invested, offer the potential for substantial job growth?
I do.
And the Brookings report also makes a second important key point, which is that the U.S. needs to support these key sectors to remain competitive globally. Here's what the report says. China now leads the world in clean economy deployment. In 2010, China put into place a staggering $54.4 billion in clean energy investments. By contrast, U.S. private investment in clean energy totaled $34 billion. Now the gap is widening further. The Brookings report also says this. China, which now produces half of the world's wind turbine and solar modules, recently announced it would accelerate its clean revolution over the next 5 years and has set out aggressive growth plans for strategic emerging industries critical to economic restructuring, including multiple new energy categories, electric vehicles, and energy efficiency products. Secretary Chu, do you agree that the sectors that might bring this country greater energy independence, solar, wind, geothermal, advanced battery development, etc., are critical for the U.S. to develop to remain globally competitive?
I agree with that.
And in a press release that accompanied the release of the Brookings study, a principal at the Brookings Institution commented on the U.S. government's involvement in this sector and said this, quote, "This is not an area where the public sector needs to get out of the way. Government leaders at all levels need to get in the game. Otherwise, we will watch the rest of the world pull away from us." Secretary, do you agree with that statement?
I do agree because many countries, China is one of them, but there are dozens of others who recognize the economic opportunity in this clean energy efficiency, and that's why these countries are investing so much. So even just to level the playing field, we need to be doing something. China has shown that it simply views this as a great economic opportunity for their prosperity in the future, both to be deployed at home, they're going to probably be the biggest deployer of clean energy in the world this year, but also for our export market.
So if we tamp down on our, I guess, our government investment in clean energy technologies, then we will lose ground to the rest of the world.
Well, I would say that we have great strength in America in invention and innovation. We have the best venture capital system in the world. We actually have great private finance markets in the world, and we should look to those strengths, and to the extent that the U.S. government can help those great strengths move forward, we should be doing that.
And some people argue that the U.S. government should not be in the business of supporting U.S. companies competing with China for clean energy technology. My question for you is this: what will that mean in terms of who owns the technologies of the future and where those jobs are located?
Well, again, we have made decisions in the past that have led to our preeminence in many things: semiconductors, computers, airplane, very competitive business, heavy government investments. Again, not everyone feels this way, but I certainly am one of those who do feel this way, that going into the future, these technologies, which are going to be as cheap as new forms of energy, including natural gas at $4 a million BTU, whether it's this decade or a decade and a half from this is happening. And when that happens, there's going to be a huge world. There is a growing world market. It's over $200 billion. It's estimated to be just for those things in the next 10, 15 years over $400 billion. So it's a big market, and we have the smarts and the know-how. So we'd rather be exporting than importing.
I thank the gentleman. I'm going to now recognize myself for a second round. I'm going to try and be lightning about this. First of all, Mr. Secretary, you commented on something earlier that was important to me. Under current law, we must sell, for example, to Korea, where we have a free trade or fair trade agreement, Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. So all of our liquefied natural gas that is currently scheduled to be produced and online in Louisiana, and I guess there's 5 sites, but 2 are further along in Louisiana and Corpus Christi, Texas. When those come online, for example, Korea could buy and could force us to sell, while Japan cannot. Does that seem like something that you should proactively look to make sure that, for example, our close ally Japan, much more heavily dependent on outside sources of energy, would have equal access to that and be able to compete for these lines? Because right now, as I understand, liquefied natural gas is being sold in the futures market such that the only countries who feel comfortable bidding are those who know that there will be a guarantee of delivery.
Well, first, we're abiding by the law, and as I said, we're obligated to allow those countries which we have free trade agreements. And my understanding is that in the first liquefied natural gas exporting plant that is being constructed, well, it's not being constructed yet, but we're waiting.
It's permitted, I understand.
It's, I think they're waiting final FERC approval. And it will take 4 or 5 years to complete. These contracts and the agreements of that company are essentially spoken for by the FTA countries.
I understand. So I guess the problem is Japan can't be part of that under current law without the fear that they wouldn't get delivery. I'm concerned only because Russia has used energy as a weapon. I had the honor of being in Azerbaijan with my wife, actually, for the opening of that pipeline, which the Bush administration backed specifically in order to piece by piece by piece break down the fear in Europe of energy being unavailable if you didn't do what somebody else wanted. Let me go through an earlier point, though, now. In the case of the Project AMP, we have, and I'll ask you now to send be placed in a letter, an email exchange with the lobbyist for that organization that verifies that the Bank of America, the co-investor, has no current loans out, meaning we have a reasonable assurance that, in fact, they have not met their September 11th deadline to begin construction. If that's true, Mr. Secretary, will you assure us today that that $1 billion loan commitment will not be funded, since the law specifically says that they must begin construction by September 2011?
You certainly have my assurance that we're going to do what we need to do within the bounds of the law. I actually
the law is explicit. They had to begin construction. This is a taillight by September 2011. We have a current assurance from the people that would have funded the other part of it that they have not.
Well, I was forwarded a note from my oil staff behind me that said exactly what you just said, that there was a requirement to break ground on some part of the Prologis loan guarantee, and they tell me they have indeed broken ground.
Okay. Well, we'll share the email exchange that they have not, and of course we'd like to make sure they did substantially break. But it's a large amount of money for a program that is statutorily ended, and apparently you've put no money out. You could. When did they break ground? Yeah, right. We checked. Ours was February 12th. So can your people assure you that they broke ground by the September statutory limit?
We will get back to you on that. We'll double check.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Then moving to Blue Mountain, a program that, in Nevada. Now, this program, oddly enough, bore your own signature on the approval, and no jobs were created, although it was a 1705 loan. And in fact, the monies that were dispersed as a result of the loan guarantee went to the parent company, and the construction had already been done. If that's true, will you be able to seek any kind of a drawback for it, since under the statute it was estimated, and your own website says created 200 construction jobs and 14 permanent jobs. Since the construction was already done on the day that the loan was approved and funded, does that fly in the face of what's on your website?
I would have to get back to you on that and the particulars about the timing.
Okay. Most of this comes from discovery that you voluntarily delivered to us. Mr. Secretary, I want to end mine on a note that I'm particularly interested in, and I'd ask for 30 additional seconds to ask the question without objection. Mr. Secretary, today natural gas is plentiful. We're even flaring it. Natural gas has a per, if you will, mile of driving that is substantially less than gasoline. Estimates that I've been given are that natural gas, if used as a fuel today, and this is assuming that you had just out of the tank, not all the conversion cost, would be $1 something a gallon equivalent to use natural gas at market price versus gasoline at market price. If that's true, if the American people could have nearly a 1/4 reduction by using natural gas, and if the difference between it being viable and not viable is in fact getting the 3,500 pounds per square inch compression that is typical in order to put enough of it in your tank down to 400 pounds, can you give us, and please, Secretary Chu, in language that the viewers could understand, give us the steps you believe would have to occur in order to get from where we are today, where the compression costs so much and has some danger questions and some cycle life, to one in which people could simply fill up their tank at home overnight and drive for hundreds of miles on this fuel, and as you said earlier, selecting fuel back and forth with this kind of a choice.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. You and I both share the excitement, the potential for using American energy resources and natural gas to offload a considerable amount of our transportation needs, because that means wealth creation in the United States, less imported oil, less oil dependence. And so with regard to that, we're talking right now about very, very high pressures, which require a very expensive carbon fiber tank. And we would be looking at things you put inside the tank, materials where the natural gas can absorb onto the surface of very highly porous, high surface content materials, so that it turns out, even though it's counterintuitive, if you have some other stuff in there and it goes and lands on a surface, instead of just the free gas, you may be able to store as much or more material in the same volume. And that, if we could do that, that would greatly reduce the costs of the fuel tank. It would greatly reduce the pressure. It would make natural gas filling stations much less expensive. And so we are now designing, we've first had a request for a comment, but having realized this great natural resource, we're designing a program that says, let's invest in this research. And if it happens, in possibly in a year or three, we don't know because it is research, but that would have a profound impact on transportation, not only in the United States, but all over the world, because there's a lot of natural gas now in fracking all over the world. Again, that means the whole world diversifies from oil. That will have an effect on oil prices.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I realize the quote I asked you about predated your swearing in, but in all candor, you just recounted for us a conversation you had with President Bush and another member of his administration, which also predated your swearing in. So I think the notion that we have firewalled your swearing in as the time beyond which we can't ask any questions is not correct. But I don't want to quote you incorrectly, too, and you seem to suggest that maybe there was a word that I included in your quote that was not correct. Do you have the quote from 2008 in front of you?
No, I don't.
Does your staff have a direct quote from 2008 in front of them?
No, I don't. But let me go back to what you said about my service to President Bush and his cabinet. I was asked in my role as a scientist for ideas that could help diversify the use of oil in the United States so it could bring relief to Americans. And that advice I gave, and I was delighted, I was honored to be asked for that, and I was delighted to give that advice. That actually has not changed at all. I am very committed to diversifying the energy supply of transportation in the United States.
Mr. Secretary, I was in no way, shape, or form being critical of the fact that you were gracious enough to serve two different administrations. The fact that you would talk to folks from both parties is laudable. What I'm trying to figure out, these were not the musings of a misspent youth. This wasn't a private diary that somebody got their hands on. This was a public comment that you made months before you were sworn in. And if the quote is correct, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. And other quotes you made contemporaneous with that suggest that the reason for that is to shrink demand for environmental concerns. So the notion that we have pivoted because we're in a recession, that doesn't impact the environmental concerns and why you initially advocated for higher gas prices in the first place, does it?
Well, I think you've made some logical leaps there, but let me just say that—
Well, then let me ask you, why did you advocate for higher gas prices in 2008?
I have nothing more to add to that quote. I have said, and I continue to say, every action that I've had as Secretary of Energy, every action I've had as a scientist was actually to diversify the supply of energy, which ultimately, if adopted on a world basis, would actually decrease gasoline prices.
You had a colloquy with one of my colleagues where you all agreed that this is a worldwide commodity with prices that are set by market pressures. So I think it's fair to ask, assuming that, how would you boost the price of gasoline? If it's set by the market, how would you do it?
Excuse me, I'm not trying to boost the price of gasoline. Quite the opposite. I'm trying to help, as a scientist, develop technologies that can diversify our energy that we use in transportation, not only in the United States, but if successful, those technologies could be marketed by United States companies all over the world. That would have an effect on gasoline prices.
Would the gentleman yield for just 1 second?
Sure.
Mr. Secretary Chu, did you support cap and trade by this administration?
I did.
And that would necessarily increase dramatically the cost of carbon, including gasoline, correct?
Well, I think the estimate of the cost of gasoline was, I think, about 30 cents, something like that.
Thank you for yielding.
I'm not trying to cross-examine what you said in 2008. I'm trying to figure out, I assume that you meant it at the time you said it. And I assume, because you are a thoughtful, precise person, that you'd put some thought into it before you said it. And I'm just trying to understand why you felt that way in 2008 when gasoline prices were almost identical to what they are now.
Again, we keep returning. I really have nothing more to add. And if you look at all my actions, what I've done as Secretary of Energy, I think everything is quite towards the other side. How do you help the American public? How do you actually help in real long-term solutions and midterm solutions? And quite candidly, a little bit here and there, and by that I mean short-term solutions. Let me give you, an example.
I'm not going to interrupt you, but I do have one more question. I'm going to let you finish that, but I got one more question.
Go ahead with your
question. No, I don't want to cut you off.
Okay. I spend a great deal of personal time trying to help stop a leak in the Gulf of Mexico. I spent a lot of time trying to help the Japanese with their nuclear reactors. They have secondary effects on the prices of oil. When the Japanese stop generating electricity from nuclear they have to go to natural gas, coal, and oil. Had there been more significant environmental impacts in the Gulf, that could have had an effect on the development of offshore oil. And so if you look at what I do, I can contribute in all those ways to help moderate those effects.
I'm actually not questioning your motives, Mr. Secretary. I'm wondering how a 30-second swearing-in ceremony could have caused someone to pivot from advocating for European-level gas prices to now doing everything within his power to lower gas prices. That just strikes me as being a fair question. But let me ask you my last one. Loan guarantees shall be subject to the condition that the obligation is not subordinate to other financing. Why do you think that was put in the statute?
I think because when you initiate a loan, the Congress felt that they did not want to put the taxpayer behind any loan, that they should have essentially, to use the colloquial expression, first dibs on repayment back. And that was
rationale would be equally sound at a restructuring, correct?
No. The reason it would not be sound at restructuring is at a restructuring, you restructure because the company is in stress of some kind.
But that just strikes me that'd be all the more reason to want to protect the taxpayer, because if the company were doing well, then you may have private investors or you may have an alternative form of getting your loan. Only if the company's not doing well would you need to renegotiate and subordinate taxpayers, which just strikes me a company not doing well is all the more reason for that clause I just read to you, to protect the taxpayers.
Well, let me try to explain. When a company is not doing well, typically what they would want is they would seek extra capital to ride something out. There might be setback. There might be a number of reasons. This happens all the time in the private sector. And so they need extra capital. Now, if you're a private investor, you come in and you say, well, look, this company is not doing well, and you want me to put in extra capital, and yet you want me to be second in line. There's no way I can do this. And so as those in the investment community understand this very well, and that's why when the company is not doing well, you want to use whatever your means to maximize recovery of whatever the government put in. And it may turn out there are other possibilities. You could take warrants, things of that nature. But as Herb Allison said in his hearing, if your intent is to maximize taxpayer recovery in these situations, this is one of the tools you should allow to remain open.
Is there
I apologize, but we're going to have to bring this to a close. I promised the Secretary that we'd get out. The ranking members asked for 30 seconds. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to clear up something from earlier. When Mr. Jordan was asking questions, there was an implication that Herb Allison, who acted as the independent consultant, and he was is the head of the troubled asset relief program. It was an implication that he was not an independent type of party. He just wanted to submit for the record, Mr. Chairman, just a New York Times article dated today, which states that he was the Finance Committee Chairman, for Senator John McCain back.
That will be entered in the record without objection.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. In closing, Mr. Secretary, I want to say you've been a great witness. We have not always agreed. We have not agreed at the end. I certainly think Mr. Gowdy makes a good point that Congress needs to look very carefully at under what cases and with what information in the future any part of the executive branch will be able to subordinate a restructuring. And there was no notification in the statute for those restructurings. But I want to thank you for being an excellent witness. I want to close with just one pleasant thought. As we look at Solyndra and the other losses the American people are going to experience, there's one silver lining. Moore's Law has begun to affect photovoltaic. And in fact, the cost of producing electricity from the sun is getting closer and closer to a case in which we can genuinely substitute electricity made from the sun with other sources. I look forward to that day. I continue to support, as I think all of us do, the real research and development that will help get us there and limited innovation. With that, Mr. Secretary, we thank you, and we're recessed or adjourned.
Thank you.